There are stories the world tries to bury. Some are whispered through the fields, others linger in empty corridors, and some are still waiting to be heard beneath the ground. Tonight, we open the curse-bound archive, 5 tales of devotion, madness, and the thin, trembling line between the living and the damned. Turn down the lights. Let the dark listen with you. The wardrobe's witness. There are nights when silence feels heavier than sound, when the world holds its breath, and even the ticking of the clock seems reluctant to disturb the dark. Elias Thorne had grown accustomed to such nights. They often came after long hours spent hunched over blueprints and sketches, his fingers stained with graphite, his mind too restless to sleep. But lately, the silence had begun to change. It carried something else within it, a pulse, a pattern, a memory trying to surface. The dream always began the same way, a single bulb flickering above a narrow room, its pale light casting uneven shadows across the walls. The air smelled of dust and rain-soaked wood, and in the corner, always in the corner, stood the wardrobe. It was tall and angular, carved from oak so dark it seemed to absorb the light around it. Its door hung slightly ajar, a sliver of blackness cutting through the dim. Elias never wanted to look at it, but somehow, his body moved on its own. Each night he found himself drawn closer, until his reflection wavered faintly on the brass handle. Then came the sound. Free deliberate nox. Knock, knock, knock. Every time, he would wake before the 4th, his body slick with sweat, his lungs straining as if he'd surfaced from deep underwater. He would sit there in the half-light of his bedroom, listening to the hum of the city beyond the window, waiting for his heartbeat to slow. Sometimes he'd whisper aloud, "It's just a dream," though the words never felt entirely convincing. By the 3rd week, the dream had begun to leave traces behind. He started waking with the faint scent of wood oil in his nose, or with the impression of something cold against his hand, like he'd been gripping metal. He told himself it was stress, overwork, sleep deprivation. There was always an explanation until the call came. The client's voice over the phone was polite, deliberate, the kind of tone people use when speaking to professionals they don't quite trust yet. "I've inherited a property," she said. "It's an apartment in the old district. Needs restoration. The previous tenant passed away. It's been locked for some time." Elias accepted immediately. He was good at reviving forgotten spaces. He enjoyed the idea of giving shape and purpose to the abandoned. It wasn't until she gave him the address that his hand hesitated over the notepad. Caraway Street, apartment 3B. For a long moment, he just stared at the letters. A faint pulse began in his throat. He told himself it was coincidence. Dreams are shapeless things. They borrow faces and names, rearrange memories, steal details from the waking world. He forced a smile, thanked the woman, and wrote down the address. Still, the sound of her voice lingered in his ear, long after the call had ended, like a faint echo in an empty hallway. He arrived at the building on a Friday afternoon, under a sky swollen with rain. Caraway Street was quiet, the kind of street that seemed permanently trapped between decades. The apartment block leaned slightly toward the road, its facade streaked with soot and time. Inside, the hall smelled of rusted pipes and old wallpaper glue. Each step Elias took made the floorboards whisper beneath his shoes. The lock resisted his first attempt. When the door finally gave way, a gust of stale air pressed against him, carrying the scent of mold, paint, and something faintly metallic like blood, left too long on iron. The room was darker than it should have been. Even with the blinds half open, the light from outside seemed to dissolve before it reached the floor. He took a step in. Dust stirred around him, swirling like tiny moths in the faint light. The air felt thick, and the silence seemed to press closer with every breath. It wasn't until his eyes adjusted that he saw it. The wardrobe. It stood in the far corner of the bedroom, tall and unyielding, its surface carved with faded vines that coiled around the edges like veins. The brass handle caught a flicker of light, dull and finger-worn. The door, just like in his dreams, hung slightly ajar. Elias stopped breathing. His pulse thrummed in his ears, loud and uneven. He tried to convince himself that this was a coincidence, a trick of the mind, a reflection of a dream he no longer remembered clearly. He forced his feet to move closer, one slow step at a time, until he could see the fine dust gathered around the base of the wardrobe, untouched for years. The smell of the wood was sharp and earthy. He reached out, tracing the carved pattern along the frame, feeling the grooves beneath his fingertips. The air inside the apartment seemed to shift. Something within the wood creaked softly, a sound so subtle it might have been the building settling. But then, from within that silence, came a dull knock. Once, twice, 3 times. He pulled his hand back as if burned. The sound had come from inside, he was certain of it. Yet the wardrobe remained still, innocent in its stillness. Elias stood there for a full minute, waiting for another sound, but none came. Finally, he laughed quietly to himself, though the sound came out brittle and dry. "Old wood," he whispered. "Temperature changes, that's all." But when he looked at the door again, it seemed to have moved open, perhaps a fraction wider. He left early that day, told himself he'd bring his tools tomorrow, perhaps even stay overnight to take notes for the renovation. The thought of spending another night in his apartment with those dreams waiting behind his eyelids felt worse than staying in the haunted quiet of Caraway Street. At least here, the fear had a shape, a reason, a piece of furniture he could touch, measure, and understand. By dusk, he had set up a makeshift workspace in the living room. His sleeping bag lay rolled near the couch, and his equipment was neatly arranged on the table. A flashlight, a tape measure, a notebook, a bottle of water. He worked late into the evening, sketching the structure of the walls, testing the floorboards. Every creak seemed louder than it should have been. The wardrobe loomed through the open doorway, its shadow stretching long and black across the bedroom floor. When he finally lay down to rest, the city outside had gone silent. The only sound was the distant hum of rain tapping against the glass. He turned on his side, facing the hallway where the wardrobe waited beyond. His eyelids grew heavy. He wasn't sure when sleep took him, only that it was sudden and dreamless at first. Then, faintly, came the tapping. He opened his eyes to darkness. The room had changed. It felt smaller, the air thicker. The tapping came again, soft but deliberate. He held his breath, listening. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, just like before. He sat up slowly. "It's wood," he told himself. "It's just the wood." But the voice in his mind didn't sound convinced. The sound came again, louder this time, followed by a pause, and then something else, a whisper, faint, almost lost in the rhythm of his heartbeat. He couldn't make out the words, but it carried the unmistakable tone of someone pleading. The silence afterward was absolute. He could feel his pulse in his fingertips. For a moment he thought about leaving, grabbing his keys and running out into the rain. But something in him, curiosity, pride, madness, kept him still. He wanted to understand what he was hearing. He wanted proof that it was nothing. He turned on the lamp. The soft yellow glow spilled across the room, chasing away the shadows. Everything looked ordinary. The tools, the papers, the half-empty cup of coffee. But in the doorway to the bedroom, the wardrobe stood exactly where it had been, except now, the door was open, a little wider. Not much, just enough to show a deeper line of black between the panels. He stared at it, unable to look away. His breath came shallow, uneven. The knocking had stopped, but he could almost feel the vibration of it still echoing through the floorboards. Slowly, he stood and crossed the room. Each step seemed to stretch the distance, the air growing colder as he approached. The scent of the wood was stronger now, sharper, laced with something sweet and decayed like wilted flowers left in a sealed box. When he reached the wardrobe, he hesitated. The brass handle was cool beneath his fingertips. For a moment, he thought he heard breathing on the other side. Then, without thinking, he pulled. The door didn't move. It resisted him, as though something inside was pushing back. His fingers tightened around the handle. "Come on," he muttered through clenched teeth. He pulled again. This time, the door shifted slightly before stopping once more, and the sound that followed froze him in place. A single knock, right where his hand met the wood. He let go, stumbled back a step, heart hammering. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. He stayed there for several seconds, staring at the wardrobe, until a flicker of movement caught his eye, a small dark line creeping from beneath the door. He crouched, blinking. It wasn't shadow. It was a crack. The wood had splintered along the base, leaving a thin opening just wide enough for something to slip through. He leaned closer. The smell was overwhelming now, metallic, old. Inside the crack, something glinted faintly in the lamplight. He reached out before he could stop himself, brushing the tip of his finger along the surface. Cold metal. Smooth, circular. A ring, perhaps? He tried to hook it out, but it wouldn't budge. The edge scraped his skin. He jerked his hand back, wiping at the thin red line now crossing his knuckle. The wardrobe stood silent once more, unmoving, impassive. He turned away, his head light, his pulse uneven. He left the lamp on that night, though he didn't remember deciding to. When morning came, the rain had stopped, and the apartment was filled with pale, forgiving light. The wardrobe looked ordinary again, just old wood, harmless, patiently waiting. Elias told himself the rest had been imagination, fatigue, suggestion. Yet as he reached for his notebook, he saw something resting on the table beside it. A single shaving of wood, curled tight, like a lock of hair. And beneath it, faint but undeniable, the smell of lavender. Elias Thorne never thought wood could speak. To him, it was a material, something cut, sanded, stained, and molded by human hands. A thing to be shaped, not a thing that remembered. But that night, as the lamplight brushed against the warped face of the old wardrobe, he began to understand. Wood doesn't forget. It only waits for someone to listen. The apartment was disturbingly quiet. No traffic from the street below, no footsteps from the neighbors above. The silence felt deliberate, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Elias sat on the edge of his bed, sketchbook open, but his pencil hovered uselessly in the air. His eyes never left the wardrobe across the room. Its carved doors gleamed faintly ornate swirls and floral motifs, hand-carved decades ago by some craftsman who must be long dead. But under the thin veil of varnish, there was something uneasy. The wood seemed to ripple ever so slightly, like muscle beneath skin. Elias blinked, telling himself it was just the flicker of the lamp. But then the air changed. A thin chill crept up from the floorboards, threading between his feet like smoke. The faint scent of dust and something sweeter old perfume maybe rose into the air. He took a deep breath to steady himself. But in that same moment, a sound broke the silence. Tap, tap, tap. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, soft but unmistakable. Elias froze, his head turned toward the wardrobe, heart thudding. The sound had come from inside. He waited. Nothing. No movement, no follow-up. Just the sound of his pulse pounding in his ears. Probably the pipes, he whispered to himself. Old building. He stood and crossed the room, each step creaking against the ancient floorboards. The air near the wardrobe was colder, unnaturally so. He reached out a trembling hand and laid it against the wood. The surface was freezing. And then it breathed, not a gust or draft, but an exhale, long, faint, warm. Elias jerked his hand back, his breath catching. He waited again, eyes fixed on the carved handles. Nothing, only stillness. He felt foolish, standing there talking to furniture. Yet some part of him, the part that still remembered his dreams, whispered that he wasn't imagining it. He leaned forward, pressing his ear to the wood. From somewhere deep within, a whisper slipped through the grain. A woman's voice, broken and blurred, too faint to understand. Elias stumbled back. The lamp flickered once, twice, before returning to its steady glow. The wardrobe loomed larger now. It seemed to lean forward slightly, its top edge casting a crooked shadow that reached across the floor like a spreading stain. Elias didn't sleep that night. He sat awake, listening. The hours stretched thin, and when dawn came gray, pale, indifferent, he saw something new. A crack. It ran between the two doors of the wardrobe, fine as a hairline fracture, exactly where the knocks had come from. He crouched, brushing the surface with his thumb. Something papery flaked off. A folded scrap of parchment slid out and landed by his foot. He hesitated, then picked it up. The paper was brittle and yellowed, faintly smelling of smoke. Scrawled in pencil, uneven and trembling, were 3 words. "She remembers me." Later that morning, Elias went downstairs to the cafe beneath the apartment. The smell of coffee and cinnamon bread barely masked the scent of rain seeping through the old brick. Marjorie, the owner, recognized him from the renovation project and gave him a cautious smile. "You're staying in the Croft flat, aren't you?" she asked. Elias nodded. "Do you happen to know anything about the woman who lived there?" Marjorie paused, mid-wipe with her rag, eyes flicking toward the window. "Helen Croft. She lived alone, kept to herself. I heard she used to sing in a lounge back in the 70s. Some say she fell down the stairs, broke her neck. Others say she leaned closer, voice dropping. She never really left that room." Elias felt the words sink into him like ice water. "You mean?" But Marjorie just gave a small, tight smile and turned away. "Old buildings have memories," she said, "and some memories don't like to fade." That night, Elias couldn't stay away from the wardrobe. Curiosity, fear, and a strange sympathy tangled inside him. He set up a small voice recorder on his nightstand, aimed it toward the wardrobe, and turned off the light. The darkness was suffocating, the kind that hums. Outside, a storm was gathering, its first drops tapping the window like impatient fingers. Elias lay still, trying to slow his breathing. Minutes passed. Then, right on cue, tap, tap, tap. He held his breath. This time, the knocks came slower, deeper, and then, faint as silk tearing, a voice. "Help me." Elias sat upright, heart hammering. "Who's there?" he whispered. Silence. He replayed the recording immediately. Static hissed through his headphones. The knocks were there, and then a low, rasping breath. A woman's voice, close to the microphone, whispering. "He made me stay." Elias tore the headphones off and stumbled back. The words kept echoing in his head. "He made me stay." He turned toward the wardrobe again. Its shape in the dim light seemed different, taller, narrower, almost human. He couldn't explain why, but he felt watched, not from outside the wardrobe, but from within it. He stepped closer. His hand trembled as he touched the door. The wood was alive with vibration, subtle but constant, like a faint heartbeat. He pressed his ear to it and froze. There it was again, a rhythm. Slow, beating, not his. Elias stumbled backward, tripping over the rug. The wardrobe shuddered, its hinges groaning softly. The air thickened. Then came the first thud. Thud, thud, thud. Something, or someone, was pounding from the inside. He bolted for the door, but the handle wouldn't turn. It was locked. He rattled it hard, but it didn't budge. Behind him, the pounding grew violent. Wood splintered. Dust fell from the ceiling. Elias turned and saw cracks spidering across the wardrobe's face, spreading like veins. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Elias slid to the floor, chest heaving. The only sound was the wind outside, whispering against the window. He stayed there until the first light of morning washed across the room. The wardrobe looked the same as always, except for the crack. It had widened overnight. He opened his phone, hand shaking, to replay the recording again. But this time, after the woman's voice faded, another sound bled through. A low chuckle. Male. Close. Then, whispered right against the microphone. "You shouldn't have listened. The voice wasn't from the tape. It was in the room." Elias dropped the phone. The screen fractured, the crack crawling across the glass mirroring the one in the wardrobe. He backed away, trembling. The two lines seemed to pulse together, in sync. He couldn't explain it, but in that moment he felt connected to the thing inside. Bound. He left the apartment that evening. The storm had passed, leaving the city glazed in wet light. He walked aimlessly through narrow streets until the rain began again, soft, relentless. Yet no matter how far he went, the image of the wardrobe followed him. Its silence, its breath, its memory. By midnight he was standing once more at his door. He didn't know why he returned, only that the pull was unbearable. Something inside him whispered that if he didn't go back, the voice would find him anyway. When he opened the door, the air inside was warm. The scent of lavender drifted through the room, gentle and inviting. The wardrobe stood in the same place as always, perfectly still. Elias approached slowly. "Helen," he whispered. "Is that your name?" For a long moment, nothing. Then, very softly, almost tenderly, "I remember." The doors creaked open on their own. A pale light spilled out, not bright, but silver, like moonlight through water. Inside, there was no clothing, no shelves, no shadow, only depth, a darkness that looked endless. Elias stepped closer, mesmerized. The light shimmered faintly against the wood, revealing dozens of faint impressions pressed into the inside walls. Handprints, faces, the suggestion of movement frozen in the grain. The wood whispered again. Words that weren't words, memories without names. Laughter, sobbing, breathing. Elias felt tears rise in his eyes. "I hear you," he said softly. Then, gently, the doors swung shut. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping softly on the window. By morning, the apartment was quiet. But sometimes when the city sleeps and the wind slides between the buildings, you can still hear it. Tap, tap, tap. 3 knocks. From within the wood, rain pressed against the windows all night, whispering like fingers dragging across the glass. By dawn, the sound faded into a low hiss, the kind that feels like the house itself is breathing. Evelyn hadn't slept. Not after the knocking. Not after what she'd heard beyond the wardrobe door. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see the faint silhouette moving behind the slats. The same figure she had once drawn as a child. The same faceless shape her grandmother had warned her about. But the morning light made everything look smaller, more manageable. Like the night had exaggerated its terrors. So she got up, dressed, and decided to face it. The wardrobe stood where it always had, beside the bed, its mirror warped from age. She approached, her reflection stretching and bending as if watching her from another world. For a moment she placed her hand against the cool wood and felt it hum beneath her palm. She jerked her hand back. Silence. It wasn't fear that made her hesitate. It was the certainty that the wardrobe was no longer just an object. It was something alive, something waiting. She decided to call her brother, Liam, the only person who had been with her when they found that thing years ago. Liam answered on the 3rd ring, his voice tight with exhaustion. "Eve? It's been years. Why now?" "There's something wrong with the wardrobe again," she said. "It's not quiet anymore." He didn't laugh. He didn't even question her. Just silence then. "You opened it?" "No, but it's moving." On the other end, a shaky breath. "Do you still have the tin box?" Her heart stopped. "What tin box?" "The one we buried in the garden, after Mom died." Evelyn frowned, pacing. "I thought you burned it." "No," Liam said. "I couldn't. There was something inside. A tape." "What kind of tape?" "An old cassette. It had her voice, I think." His words came out clipped, half swallowed, like he didn't want to hear himself say them. "She recorded herself talking about the thing in the wardrobe," he continued, "about how it used to follow her dreams. She said it wanted to be remembered." Evelyn leaned against the wall, trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because she said if we ever played it again, it would come back." The memory hit her like cold water. The storm. Their mother's voice calling them from the attic. The black wardrobe half buried in dust and spider webs. The sound of wood, creaking rhythmic, like breathing, and her mother whispering, "Don't open it if it knocks twice." That same night, the house had gone silent. The next morning, their mother was gone. Evelyn's chest tightened. "Where's the box now?" Liam hesitated. "I buried it under the old maple. But if the wardrobe's moving again, we might be too late." By evening, Evelyn was in her car, heading toward the old house on Maple Hill, their childhood home, long abandoned after their mother's disappearance. The road twisted through the forest like a memory refusing to fade. Branches clawed at her windshield, rain streaking in diagonal cuts. The deeper she drove, the weaker the radio signal became, until it dissolved into static, a soft hiss that rose and fell, like someone whispering her name beneath the noise. When she reached the gate, the house loomed against the dusk. Crooked roof, boarded windows, a shell of something once alive. The garden had devoured everything, even the path. She stepped into the overgrowth, following the faint outline of the maple tree. The ground was soft, the earth damp with rot. She dug with her hands until her nails broke against metal. There it was, a small tin box, rusted at the edges, wrapped in brittle cloth. She held it close, trembling. The lock gave, easily. Inside was a cassette tape, unlabeled. The tape itself half unraveled as though it had been rewound again and again. And tucked beneath it a Polaroid photo of their mother standing beside the wardrobe. Her face was blurred, the colors wrong, like the film had tried to reject the image. But what drew Evelyn's eye was the reflection in the wardrobe mirror. A figure stood there. Not her mother. Something darker. The cassette player still worked. She tested it with a pencil first, tightening the reel, then slid it in. The tape began to play a faint click, followed by a long breath. Then a woman's voice, fragile and shaking. "June 4th, 1998. The wardrobe has started knocking again. 3 nights in a row, always at 3:12. I've been dreaming of the woods. There's a voice there, it doesn't speak. It echoes. It told me it remembers the one who built it." Evelyn's pulse quickened. It was their mother's voice. "She says her name is Mara. She used to belong to someone before us, before this house was even built. The wardrobe isn't furniture. It's a passage, a threshold. When you open it, you don't see what's inside, you see what wants to be seen." A pause. Rustling. I can hear her behind me as I speak. "If you're listening, don't stay near the mirror. It listens too." Static swallowed the rest. Then, faintly, another voice. Low. Not her mother's. Whispering something beneath the hum. Evelyn froze the tape. Replayed it. The same whisper. A syllable stretched into a shape she could almost understand. Her own name. Inside the house, the air felt heavy. Dust floated like suspended ash. She moved through the hallway, her flashlight slicing across wallpaper patterned with faded roses. Everything was the same. The clock, the crooked picture frames, even the faint smell of cedar and rot. The wardrobe waited in the corner of the bedroom. Its door was slightly open. A sliver of darkness peered through the gap. Too deep, too wrong for such a narrow space. Evelyn placed the tape recorder on the bed and pressed play again. Her mother's voice filled the room. "If you hear the second knock, do not answer. That's when it's listening for a new name." The tape crackled, distorted, then stopped. A single knock came from inside the wardrobe. She froze. Then another. Evelyn whispered, "No." The handle turned slowly. She stumbled back, reaching for the recorder, but the device kept playing on its own. The voice that came next wasn't her mother's. It was hers. "Evelyn," the tape hissed. "You left me here." The wardrobe door creaked open. The smell of damp earth poured out, followed by a rush of cold air that smelled like rain-soaked wood and metal. In the darkness beyond, something moved faint and fluid, like smoke taking shape. And then she saw it. A figure standing within, faceless, but familiar in its stillness. Its hands hung at its sides, but the shadow of its mouth trembled as though trying to mimic her expression. The same voice, her voice echoed again, though her lips never moved. "Come see what you forgot." The air thickened. The mirror on the wardrobe's door began to ripple, showing flashes of rooms that no longer existed. The kitchen, as it once was, her mother sitting at the table humming, the garden in sunlight, Liam as a boy, laughing beside the tree. But each image decayed faster than the last, colors draining into gray, until the mirror showed only one thing, the wardrobe itself in another place, standing in a forest clearing under pale moonlight, the same wardrobe. But its door was wide open and inside was not darkness, but a narrow hallway lined with mirrors. Evelyn took a step closer. Her reflection didn't move. The recorder hissed. The whisper returned. "Come back." And her reflection, no longer bound by her, smiled. When Liam arrived hours later, the house was silent. The tape player sat on the floor, still spinning, though the tape had long ended. The wardrobe stood open, empty, but inside, at the very back, someone had carved a new word into the wood, Evelyn, and beneath it, in smaller, shakier letters, "Remember." Liam stepped back, trembling. Then he saw the Polaroid lying beside the wardrobe, the one she'd found in the box. Now, there were 3 people in it, their mother, the dark figure, and Evelyn standing beside them, smiling faintly, her eyes hollow. The morning after Evelyn vanished, the house looked the same too, still, too ordinary, like it had chosen silence as camouflage. Liam stood in the hallway, gripping the old tape recorder. It was still running, the reels turning soundlessly now, though no tape remained inside. He'd spent the last hour searching, calling her name, opening every door, checking the windows. Nothing. Not even footprints by the wardrobe. The dust hadn't been disturbed. It was as if she had been erased, not taken. He looked down at the wardrobe. Its mirror no longer reflected him properly. His outline shimmered, edges bending inward, as if the glass were deep water disturbed by breath. When he whispered her name, the sound didn't echo in the room, it echoed inside the mirror. He tried the tape again. It hissed, clicked, and began to play, but instead of Evelyn's voice, it was a distant recording of rain. Then came breathing, slow, familiar, almost human. And then, "Don't stand in front of the mirror, Liam." His pulse spiked. It was his sister's voice. He froze. "Evelyn?" The tape stuttered. The voice came again, lower this time. "It listens when you say my name." "Don't." The sound warped, melting into static. But behind it, he could make out faint knocking 2 slow raps, then one quick one. He knew that rhythm. The same pattern their mother had mentioned. 2 to listen, 1 to answer. Liam stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The sound rang through the house, and for a moment, the mirror rippled like a disturbed pond. Then something behind the glass moved. He stepped closer, peering in. His reflection tilted its head, but not in sync with him. It was watching, studying him. And then, just beneath the surface, he saw another shape, a second reflection that shouldn't exist. A figure standing behind his mirrored self, faceless, shoulders narrow, hands resting against the inside of the glass. The moment he blinked, it was gone. He turned off the tape, breath shaking. He needed to leave. But the air in the house felt wrong, too heavy, too thick, as if the walls themselves were breathing slower than they should. When he reached for the doorknob, his hand brushed against something sticky. He pulled back and saw a faint red smear on the brass. Blood. Fresh. But when he looked again, the smear had already darkened, seeping into the metal like it had been there for years. He went upstairs, to their mother's old room, the only one that hadn't rotted completely. The wallpaper still held the faint outline of crucifixes once hung there. The smell of lavender lingered faintly, like something remembering how it used to be clean. There, in the center of the floor, lay another tape. He hadn't seen it before. It wasn't in the tin box. This one had been placed. No label, just a faint impression in the dust where something heavy had stood for a long time. The wardrobe. Maybe. His hands trembled as he put it into the recorder. At first, silence. Then a woman's voice, trembling. June 10th, 1998. The mirror won't show me anymore. It only shows her. I don't think she's human. I don't think she ever was. Their mother. She calls herself a guardian, but she's not protecting us, she's collecting us. Every reflection holds one of us longer than it should. I saw my hand move after I'd stopped moving. That's how it starts. Once the reflection learns you, it replaces you. A shiver crawled down his neck. She's waiting for me to open it again, his mother continued. She said the wardrobe was built as a bridge, a way to trap the dead before they forget themselves. But every bridge needs both sides. Every vessel needs something to fill it. Then a faint laugh, not from their mother. Low, feminine, wet, like it came through layers of glass and water. She says she only needs one more. The recorder clicked off. Liam didn't breathe for several seconds. Then, softly, a whisper came from behind him. You shouldn't have come alone. He turned. Evelyn was standing in the doorway. Her hair was wet, her skin pale, almost translucent, but her eyes, they weren't hers. They were darker, too deep, as if reflecting something that wasn't in the room. Eve? He whispered. She smiled faintly. You took too long. I came as soon as... Here. Expression. Flicker. For a moment, her features blurred, like something trying to remember what a face should look like. Do you know what it's like? She whispered. Being on the other side of the glass. You think it's darkness, but it isn't. It's full of voices that remember too much. He stepped forward cautiously. We can leave. We can destroy it. Burn the wardrobe. You can't burn a mirror, Liam, she said softly. You can only show it something it hasn't seen before. Her tone wasn't hers anymore. It carried that same layered echo their mother's recordings had, and as she spoke, the mirror began to hum. The reflection behind her started moving independently, its mouth forming words before Evelyn spoke them. I tried to keep it shut, she said, but it wanted more. It said I was the missing piece, that our family has always been its keepers. Liam reached for her shoulder, but his hand passed through her like cold air. The room dimmed. The walls pulsed faintly with light, as though the wallpaper itself were breathing. He stumbled backward, and his reflection in the mirror stopped mimicking him again. It just watched, smiling faintly. Then the reflection stepped forward. But Evelyn didn't move. It wasn't her reflection that crossed the glass, it was something wearing her outline. A hollow version. Limbs slightly too long, eyes vacant, the faint shimmer of mirrored surface rippling beneath its skin. Don't you remember me? It whispered, voice overlapping with Evelyn's and something else, something older. You used to draw me. The woman in the wardrobe. He backed toward the door, fumbling for the recorder. You're not her. The thing tilted its head. And yet you made me. Every story your mother told, every warning she gave you, it fed me. I am the echo of every reflection that looked too long. The lights flickered, the air trembling with low resonance, like glass under pressure. Then the mirror cracked once, then twice. From the fractures spilled a faint mist, silver gray, swirling like smoke. The creature, the hollow reflection, stepped fully out, dragging its hand along the glass as it did. The mirror didn't shatter. It absorbed the motion, rippling like a membrane. Evelyn isn't gone, it said. She's here, inside. You'll see her soon. Liam ran, down the stairs, through the hall, into the garden. He didn't stop until the night swallowed the house behind him. The air outside felt wrong, colder than it should have been. When he turned back, the house wasn't dark anymore. Every window glowed faintly from within, as though lit by candlelight. And in one of the upstairs windows, he saw her. Evelyn, standing perfectly still, hand pressed against the glass, her mouth moving soundlessly. He could almost read the words, "Help me." Then, something moved behind her, a second face pressing against the same pane of glass, smiling wider, until it split open into a grin that didn't belong to a human face at all. The lights went out. He didn't sleep that night. He parked the car far from the house and waited for dawn. But as the sun rose, the wardrobe appeared again. Not in the house, not in the attic, but outside, standing in the middle of the field behind the tree line. The door was ajar, and through the crack, he could see faint light, pulsing, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Liam approached slowly, drawn despite everything in him screaming to turn back. Inside, the wardrobe was deeper than it should have been. Much deeper. Like a tunnel lined with glass. Every surface reflected him from different angles, each version slightly delayed, as if the reflections were reacting a second too late. He could hear whispering. Familiar voices. His mother. Evelyn. Even his own. "Come closer," one said. "Finish it," said another. He took one step inside. The wood underfoot creaked like bone. The air shifted, colder now, denser. His breath fogged the mirrored walls, and wherever he exhaled, shapes formed in the condensation, hands, faces, mouths pressed close to the surface. "Don't look at them," he whispered to himself. "They're not real." But then one of the faces spoke. "You left me here." Evelyn's voice again. But from behind him this time. He turned. Nothing but the dark hallway. He tried to back out, but the entrance was gone. Only endless mirrored walls surrounded him now. And each reflection was no longer his own. They were versions of him, standing still, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent screams. He ran, but no matter which direction he turned, the corridor folded inward, like the mirrors themselves were rearranging to trap him. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices merging into a single low hum. Then, above it all, that same voice, soft, wet, and endless. Every mirror remembers, every watcher becomes what it sees. And Dufour. He stumbled, falling to his knees. The ground below him rippled, turning reflective. His own reflection stared back, smiling this time. It raised a hand before he did, and from behind the glass, something pulled. A single, perfect sound of glass cracking, then silence. By the time the townspeople came, the wardrobe stood alone in the field. The house was gone, not collapsed, not burned, simply missing. All that remained was a single mirror shard, embedded in the earth, reflecting nothing but gray sky. And on its surface, etched faintly in condensation, two words appeared every time someone drew close. "Look closer." Dawn crept in, slow and gray, rolling like mist across the empty field. The wardrobe still stood there, a solitary silhouette against the trembling horizon. Its door slightly open, as if waiting. It had rained sometime during the night. Water gathered in the footprints that led nowhere. When the investigators arrived, they found no house, no bodies, only fragments of something that had once been wooden and alive. The wardrobe, though centuries old, looked untouched by time. One of them, a man named Rowan, swore the grain of the wood seemed to breathe beneath his fingertips. He shouldn't have touched it. He would later tell himself that curiosity was stronger than fear, that maybe if he looked, he'd understand what had happened to the Thorns, the mother, the daughter, the son, the family that vanished without a sound. But there are some stories that do not reveal themselves to understanding. They only reveal you. By the second night, the wardrobe had been moved into the town's storage barn, placed behind ropes, and labeled as evidence. Rowan volunteered for the overnight watch. He didn't trust leaving it there, surrounded by relics of old crimes. He told himself it was only wood, but every time he looked away, it felt like it had shifted slightly, as though its angles bent a fraction more toward him. He sat under the dim lamp, flipping through the recovered tapes. Most were blank. One wasn't. He pressed play. A woman's voice emerged, hoarse, whispering between static. "Do not mistake the reflection for what it shows." Then silence. A faint scraping sound followed, like nails tracing along glass. Each watcher becomes what it gazes upon. The mirror feeds on the certainty of being seen. Rowan frowned, turning up the volume. The voice grew clearer. "If you find the wardrobe, don't look at your reflection. You're not looking at yourself. You're looking at who it's decided you'll become." Hours passed. The barn filled with the quiet rhythm of night insects. Occasionally, the roof groaned. Rowan drifted in and out of thought, the sound of rain leaking through cracks in the wood above. At some point, the lamp flickered. He looked up. The wardrobe's mirror caught the weak light, a silver gleam in the dark. He froze, because his reflection was already standing there, waiting. He hadn't moved, yet the mirrored version of himself had leaned forward, palms against the glass. It looked tired, hollow-eyed, but not afraid. And then, impossibly, it smiled. The smile spread slow and unnatural, cutting too wide. Rowan stumbled up, knocking over the lamp. The barn plunged into half-darkness. When he grabbed his flashlight and shone it toward the wardrobe, the reflection was gone. Only the faint condensation of breath marked the glass, except it wasn't his. The print was smaller, more delicate, like a woman's. He barely slept that night. In the morning, he tried to report what he'd seen, but the sheriff dismissed it, said the mind plays tricks when you've been awake too long, surrounded by ghosts of evidence. But the mirror stayed with him. He saw it every time he blinked, that faint shimmer of movement just behind his reflection, always half a second delayed. That evening, when he returned home, the lights flickered again. His apartment was small, tidy, with only one mirror in the hallway. He avoided it until the whisper came. Rowan. He turned. The mirror's surface rippled once, like disturbed water. For an instant, he saw a shape forming inside the outline of a woman standing where he should have been. He didn't know her, yet her eyes felt familiar. Then came the sound of dripping, soft, rhythmic, metallic. When he looked down, a single drop of water had fallen from the mirror's edge, staining the carpet dark. He touched it. It wasn't water. It was warm. That night, Rowan dreamed of the wardrobe. He was inside it, though it felt endless corridors of glass stretching outward, reflections walking beside him. Some were younger, some older, all versions of him trapped mid-breath. Among them, one reflection was different. It didn't mimic him. It watched him with something close to pity. "Do you know where you are?" it asked, its voice overlapping with dozens of echoes. He couldn't speak. "The bridge works both ways," it said softly. "You call it a mirror, but it's a mouth. It devours what forgets to look away." He turned, and the corridor folded like paper, sealing him in. The reflection smiled. "You were never guarding it. It was guarding you." He woke gasping, drenched in cold sweat. When Rowan returned to the barn the next day, the wardrobe door was open. No one had touched it. No one admitted to unlocking it. Inside, the mirror no longer showed his reflection at all. Only faint outlines, like silhouettes burned into glass. He thought he saw movement in the corner, faint as dust stirred by breath, and then he heard a voice, low, gentle, familiar. "You shouldn't have stayed." He spun around. A woman stood beside the wardrobe. Her hair hung damp against her shoulders. Her face pale, eyes sunken. She wore an old silver ring, bent out of shape. "Who are you?" he managed. She smiled faintly. "No one remembers my name. They only remember the furniture." Her hand slid along the mirror's edge. The surface rippled beneath her touch, like mercury. "It's hungry again," she whispered. "It always hungers after silence. When no one's left to speak the truth, it opens." Rowan swallowed hard. "What is it?" "The guardian," she said simply. "The one who keeps the gate between what was forgotten and what refuses to die." She turned to him then, eyes glinting like wet glass. "And now you've taken my place." Before he could move, she stepped back into the mirror, and the glass sealed shut with a soft sigh, like breath on cold air. He ran. He tried to tell the others, to get rid of the wardrobe, but every time he spoke, the words came out wrong. It was as if the sentences rearranged themselves in his mouth, twisting meaning. By dusk, his reflection had stopped matching his gestures entirely. He would raise a hand. It would remain still. He would blink. It would stare. And when he finally smashed the mirror with a hammer, there was no sound. The glass didn't shatter, it simply absorbed the blow, rippling once, then settling back into stillness. He pressed his ear against it, desperate. From the other side came faint breathing. Then, "Thank you." The following morning, the wardrobe was gone. The barn stood empty. The ropes and tags scattered across the floor. In its place was a faint, circular mark in the dust, as if something heavy had melted through the ground. The sheriff ordered the site closed. Rowan didn't argue. He just went home, locked every door, covered every mirror. For a week, nothing happened, until one night, when he found a new object waiting in his living room, an antique hand mirror, polished, familiar. He hadn't brought it there. It lay face down on the table. His breath fogged the air as he reached for it. The moment he touched it, the air thickened, like the room itself had inhaled. He flipped it over. At first, nothing but his face. Tired, unshaven. Then, behind him, a woman appeared. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. When he turned, the room was empty, but in the reflection, she was closer. He watched in horror as her hands pressed against the inside of the glass, leaving faint prints. Her lips moved again. "Let me out." He dropped the mirror. It didn't break. It landed softly, as though cushioned by air. And when he looked down, his own reflection was gone. Only hers remained. Weeks later, people began whispering about the strange object that had reappeared in the center of town. A wardrobe, half buried in the earth, its mirror cracked into 1,000 tiny veins. Some said if you stood before it at midnight, you could hear someone whispering your name. Others claimed the cracks formed words when the moonlight hit them just right. No one dared to touch it, except for one child, a boy no older than 10 who wandered too close one evening. He said he saw someone inside the glass, a man in a uniform. He said the man looked tired, but kind, that he smiled at him. And when asked what the man said, the boy hesitated. "He told me," the boy whispered, "that it's safe now, that the guardian found peace." The townspeople didn't believe him, but that night, the cracks in the mirror began to close, slowly, patiently, like something being sealed away again. Months later, when the wardrobe was finally moved to a museum, the curator noticed something odd on the back of the mirror, carved faintly into the silver backing. Almost invisible unless caught by light, were 3 words: "Do not knock." He traced the letters with his thumb. From the glass came the faintest sound. 2 slow knocks, one quick, then silence. The curator backed away. Behind the mirror, a shadow moved, once the shape of a man with hollow eyes and a faint smile, standing guard from the other side. The guardian had not left. He had simply taken his place, and somewhere deep within that silver surface, faint and endless, the whispers began again, soft as dust, patient as time. Every watcher becomes what it gazes upon. Yeah, the cursed Valentine. Clara had never liked silence, yet the apartment she found in the heart of New Orleans promised exactly that: quiet, privacy, and a rent cheap enough to make her doubts sound ungrateful. Apartment No. 302, the landlord said, had a bit of history. She thought that meant old pipes, a creaking floor, maybe a stubborn ghost of cigarette smoke from tenants long gone. But history, as she would learn, had a way of breathing softly, persistently through cracks in the floorboards. The building itself was older than the jazz still echoing in the quarter's alleys. From the outside it looked almost gentle. Pale stucco faded to the color of bone, shuttered windows half closed like tired eyes. When Clara moved in that damp February afternoon, the rain had not yet stopped. It had that peculiar Louisiana scent, sweet rot, magnolia, and the faint sting of iron. She carried her boxes up the narrow stairwell, each step sighing under her weight, and thought about how the air seemed heavier up there, as though the building kept secrets pressed inside its walls. She was 23. A literature student who still wrote letters to herself whenever she felt lonely, letters she never mailed. There was something about the texture of paper, the act of folding it, sealing it, that made her believe emotions could be contained, at least for a while. When she unpacked her things in the small living room, a single window, pale curtains trembling with the draft, she felt a little thrill. This would be the place where she could be invisible, unseen, safe inside her thoughts. But that first night, the quiet was not kind. It came with layers. The hum of the old refrigerator, the tick of a distant pipe, the floorboards murmuring when she crossed from the kitchen to the couch. Somewhere below, a door slammed and sent a tremor up through the wood. It wasn't frightening, not exactly, just aware. Like the building was listening. She lit a candle on the coffee table and sat cross-legged beside a pile of old books she'd bought from a thrift store near campus. The wax melted in slow glimmers. She could hear rain still tapping the window pane, and that's when she noticed it. A slight unevenness in the floor beneath her. A board that seemed to rise just a little higher than the others. She pressed her palm against it. It flexed slightly under her hand. Curiosity is a gentle kind of hunger. She fetched a knife from the kitchen, slipped its blade into the narrow seam, and pried the wood up just enough to see the dark cavity beneath. Dust swirled in the candlelight. At first, she saw nothing, just cobwebs. A nail. Then, something soft, folded. Paper. It was a letter. The envelope was yellowed with time, sealed but brittle, like it had been sleeping under that board for years. Her name wasn't on it, only a faint red mark, almost like a fingerprint, smeared across the flap. The handwriting was elegant, slanted. The ink darkened to a brownish red. She turned it over in her hands, hesitating. She could smell something faintly metallic on it, a ghost of iron and perfume. She broke the seal. The paper unfolded with a sigh. "My dearest," it began, "if love can outlive the heart, then perhaps you'll read this when the rest of me is dust. I waited for you by the window last Valentine's night. The candle burned until dawn. I swore I saw your shadow at the door, but it was only the wind. I am tired of waiting, yet I cannot leave. You promised, remember? You said forever, and I believed you." It wasn't signed. The last lines trailed off into a blot of darker ink, as if the writer's hand had trembled or something else had happened. Clara sat there for a long time, the letter trembling slightly between her fingers. She smiled, faintly. "An old love letter," she murmured. It was romantic in that tragic, gothic way her professors would have loved. Still, something in it made her throat tighten. The candlelight seemed to flicker stronger when she read the word forever. She placed the letter on the table and looked around. The apartment suddenly felt different, as though the air itself had shifted toward her, drawn by memory. She told herself it was only the draft. Later, lying in bed, she listened to the building breathe. It was the kind of old structure that made sounds without meaning. Wood expanding, pipes knocking, the wind's soft fingernails on the shutters. Yet at some hour, close to midnight, she could have sworn she heard whispering. It wasn't clear, not a voice she could understand. More like someone talking through fabric. The sound came from the floor, beneath her. She held her breath and listened harder. It stopped. Perhaps the letter had simply unsettled her. She laughed quietly to herself, the sound trembling. "You're just tired, Clara," she whispered. "It's just an old story trapped in the wood." The next morning, the light through the curtains was watery, pale gold against dust. She made coffee and sat by the window. From up there, she could see the iron balconies of the neighboring buildings, draped with ivy and faded bunting left from Mardi Gras. A cat prowled along the ledge opposite her, tail flicking. Everything looked ordinary again, mundane. Still, she found herself glancing at the table, at the folded letter resting beside her cup. The ink shimmered faintly when the light hit it. Red, not brown, she realized now. A deep, almost living red. She tried to distract herself with her glasses, but her thoughts drifted. Who had written it? Why hide it beneath the floor? And why use that particular phrasing, "You promised me forever"? There was devotion in the words, yes, but also accusation. Something unresolved. That evening, she visited the landlord, an older woman who lived on the first floor and smelled of lilac and cigarettes. The woman smiled when Clara mentioned finding an old letter. "Ah, you found one of those," she said, tapping her ashtray. "That building's full of them. People used to say it was for lovers who never came home. Don't worry yourself about it, dear." "One of those?" Clara asked, but the woman only shrugged. You know how people are. It's an old house. It keeps its memories. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The rain returned thin, misty, a sound like silk tearing softly across the sky. She turned in bed, feeling that subtle pull again, that awareness. The air was cool against her neck. The letter lay on the bedside table. She considered putting it back beneath the floorboard, but something stopped her. Instead, she opened it once more and read it slowly. Aloud this time, her voice low, as if reading to the empty room. The words echoed differently now. They didn't sound old, they sounded waiting. When she said the final line, "You promised me forever," she thought she heard something answer from the hall. A faint creak, a soft exhale of air, as though someone had leaned against the door from the other side. She froze, the letter trembling in her hand. The room fell silent again. The candle beside her guttered low. She whispered, almost to herself, "Hello?" Nothing, just the ticking of the wall clock. The faint sound of rain. She blew out the candle and tried to laugh at her own imagination, but the darkness felt dense, watchful. Her heart beat louder than the storm outside. In the half-light, she thought she saw the faintest trace of something on her wrist. A small bruise, pale and round, like the imprint of a fingertip. She rubbed it until it vanished. When she finally fell asleep, the letter was still open beside her pillow. Somewhere in the floor beneath, the whispering began again, slow, rhythmic, like someone murmuring a promise they hadn't forgotten. Clara began to wake before dawn, startled by things she couldn't name. The air in the apartment always felt heavier when the sky was still gray, as if the night hadn't quite left. She would open her eyes and stare into the dimness, feeling the edges of the room blur and stretch. There was a quiet to that hour that didn't comfort her anymore. It listened too closely. She told herself it was the stress of the semester, that she was lonely, that her mind was playing tricks on her. But loneliness doesn't leave bruises. The first mark appeared on her wrist, faint as a kiss, cool to the touch. She noticed it while brushing her teeth, the morning light filtering through the thin curtains, pale as milk. It wasn't a cut or a scratch, just a shadow under her skin, like someone had pressed their fingers there and left the memory of touch behind. She rubbed it, hard. It didn't fade. Her days became cluttered with small unease. When she locked the door to leave for class, she would feel the handle twitch just slightly, as if someone were testing it from the other side. She would walk down the stairwell and hear another set of footsteps echoing hers perfectly in time until she stopped. Then nothing. When she returned in the evening, the letter would be somewhere else. Not where she left it. Not even folded the same way. Once, it lay open on the windowsill, though she was certain she had closed the window before leaving. The wind had no business there. At night, she dreamed of a man she'd never seen clearly, just outlines. A shadow framed by the door, a hand that lingered near her shoulder, a voice like velvet wrapping around her name. "Clara, you promised." She woke with the echo of those words still in her chest, her throat tight, the taste of metal on her tongue. It was a Wednesday when she began hearing the phone ring. Old apartment phones always sounded lonely, as if the ringing came from somewhere further than it should. The first time, it startled her. She didn't even know the line was active. She picked up, cautious, half amused. "Hello?" she said. Static. Then a faint breath. Not the mechanical kind of line noise, but the sound of someone on the other end, inhaling. She waited, the silence stretching. Then, "Clara." A man's voice murmured, low and slow. Not threatening, but intimate. Too intimate. "You read my letter." She froze. Who is this? The line went dead. She stood there, holding the receiver to her ear long after the dial tone returned. The sound buzzed in her skull like a fly trapped in glass. That night, she left the phone unplugged. But the dreams continued. In them, the man's shape became clearer. A dark coat, hands pale against the black, eyes that glowed faintly red, as though they reflected candlelight from some room she couldn't see. He was always behind her, whispering near her ear. I waited, Clara. I kept the promise. You must too. Each time she woke, there was that same scent, something between iron and wilted roses. She started sleeping with the lamp on. A week later, her friend Miriam visited. Clara hadn't mentioned the letter, didn't want to sound delusional, but Miriam noticed how pale she looked, the way she kept glancing toward the corner where the floorboard still sat loose. Girl, you need sunlight, Miriam said, laughing lightly, setting down a bag of takeout. You look like you've been living in a haunted thesis. Clara smiled weakly. Maybe I have. Miriam rolled her eyes. Please. If this place was haunted, it'd charge double rent. What's this, though? She bent down, tapping the uneven floorboard. You gonna fix that? Clara hesitated. I found something under it. A letter. Oh no, Miriam teased. Tell me it's not cursed. Clara wanted to laugh, but something in her chest tightened. It was written in red ink. About love. Or waiting. I don't know, it felt unfinished. Sounds romantic. It doesn't feel romantic, Clara said softly. Miriam glanced at her. You okay? Clara looked down. There was a bruise on her collarbone now, faintly visible above her sweater. She hadn't noticed it before. Yeah, she lied. Just tired. When Miriam left later that night, Clara locked the door behind her and stood in the silence again. The city outside was humming distant traffic, a saxophone from some bar drifting up like smoke. Yet inside, the quiet pressed close, personal, like breath against her ear. She went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The faucet squeaked when she turned it. The moment she lifted the glass, she saw it. A reflection in the window, not her own. Behind her shoulder, the shape of someone standing, blurred by the glass, too tall to be her, too still. She spun around. No one. The letter, however, had moved again. It now lay open on the counter. Her throat went dry. Slowly, she picked it up. Beneath the original ink, faint but visible, were new lines written in the same deep red, but thinner, shakier, as if added recently. You still remember. You still belong to me. Her pulse stuttered. The candle on the counter flickered, though there was no wind. She backed away, heart hammering against her ribs. This isn't funny, she whispered to no one. Who's doing this? No answer. Only the sound of something small falling in the next room. A thud, soft but deliberate. She forced herself to look. It was the picture frame on her nightstand. The one holding a photo of her and her ex-boyfriend, Aaron. The glass had cracked straight across their faces. Clara's breath shook. No, she murmured. No, no, no. The next day, she skipped class and went to the library instead, searching old records about her building. The librarian, a man with round glasses and a voice too gentle for gossip, helped her find an article from 1976. It told of a woman named Evelyn Hart who had lived and died in apartment number 302, found on Valentine's Day. Wrists cut, a letter clutched to her chest. The police had ruled it suicide, but the article mentioned something else. A neighbor claimed to have seen a man visiting her nightly in the weeks before her death, though no one ever identified him. The story ended with a single eerie line. Some said she still waited by the window for him, even after the blood dried. Clara copied the article and folded it into her pocket. The ink smeared slightly, red from the cheap printer. That color again. That same shade that wasn't supposed to be blood, but always was. That night, the city was quiet again. Clara sat by the window. The letter spread open on the table, the article beside it. The rain had started thin, steady, silver. She felt strange calm, like the moment before confession. She whispered into the dark. Evelyn, if you're here, what do you want? Nothing answered at first, just the soft percussion of rain. Then, a faint sound from the hallway. A step. Another. Slow. Deliberate. Her hands went cold. The knob turned once, gently. The lock held. She rose, heart pounding, staring at the door. Then came the voice low, muffled through the wood, like someone pressing their mouth against it. "You promised." She stumbled backward, knocking over the chair. The candle flickered violently. The door didn't move again. When she finally gathered the courage to open it, the hallway was empty. Only the faint trace of water on the floor, leading away toward the stairwell. She locked the door again and sat on the floor, shaking. The letter lay on the table where she'd left it, but now, across the back of it, a single phrase had appeared, as if written in wet ink moments ago. "I'm with you, always." In the days that followed, the bruises grew darker. They appeared along her arms, her neck, sometimes shaped like hands. She wore scarves to class. Miriam asked questions she didn't answer. The air around her apartment thickened, turning syrupy with dread. The lights flickered when she cried. The faucet dripped red for a heartbeat before clearing. And every night, when she lay down, she could feel the mattress dip behind her, the faint pressure of someone lying beside her, breathing softly against her hair. The scent of roses grew unbearable. Once, in the mirror, she caught a glimpse of something behind her, a man's silhouette, close enough that she should have felt his hand on her shoulder. But when she turned, there was only the letter propped upright on the sink, edges damp, as if it had been crying. She whispered into the mirror, voice trembling, "What do you want from me?" The reflection moved its lips before hers did. "Forever." Clara stumbled back, heart hammering. The bathroom light sputtered and died. For a moment, the dark was absolute. And in that dark, she felt arms cold, unseen wrap around her waist. Not cruelly, almost tenderly. The whisper came, close to her ear, wet with longing. "You promised." She screamed then, breaking free, slamming into the door, fumbling for the light. When it came back, she was alone. The letter lay in the sink now, soaked through, the red ink bleeding like veins through the paper. When she tried to tear it, the paper refused to rip. It only folded back into her hand, dry again, pristine, as if nothing had happened. That night, Clara didn't sleep at all. She sat in the corner of the room with every lamp on, eyes fixed on the letter on the table. The wind outside moaned through the shutters, and somewhere deep in the walls something answered. A whisper, a sigh, a promise. The tape began with the same sound as before, that faint, hollow hiss, like rain brushing against an empty house. Then came silence, a long, endless silence that felt too deliberate to be nothing. Henry sat by the desk, a small recorder perched between his palms. The single desk lamp flickered slightly, throwing tremors of shadow across the walls. Outside, the woods exhaled, branches shifting, leaves whispering, and every few seconds, he thought he heard a distant hum, the same tone he'd caught on the first tape. But tonight, something was different. The air carried weight, as though the house itself had been holding its breath. Then, a voice, soft, breathless, almost pleading. "Don't rewind this one. Please, just listen once." Henry froze. The voice wasn't his own, nor the woman's from the first recording. It was younger, hesitant, shaking, as though the speaker was speaking from the dark corner of a room they shouldn't be in. He adjusted the volume. The voice continued. "If you found the tin box, it means you've already seen the signs. I tried to warn her, but she didn't listen. The Guardian doesn't like being watched." A faint knock echoed on the tape, 3 taps, uneven, too close to the microphone. Henry looked up instinctively. For a second, he thought someone had knocked on his window. If you've started hearing the hum, it's already looking back. That sound isn't in the air. It's inside the wood. Every tree in those woods remembers. Every trunk has a name carved into it. Some you can see, some you can't anymore, but they all whisper. You'll hear them if you stay long enough. Henry leaned closer, his heartbeat sinking with the rhythm of the tape's static. They say the Guardian was the first one who tried to bury the voices. He thought he could silence them. But the forest keeps everything. Another pause. A rustle. Then a soft intake of breath. If you ever see your own reflection standing still when you move, don't blink. A click. The recording ended. Henry stared at the recorder, fingers trembling slightly. His reflection in the window watched him, pale and unblinking, until the wind shifted and broke the illusion. He stood up, rubbing his temples. The message sounded like madness, a local legend wrapped in paranoia. Yet, something about the phrasing, "The Guardian doesn't like being watched," it wasn't a warning. It was a rule. That night, Henry couldn't sleep. The hum was back, faint, distant, but persistent, like someone humming a lullaby through the walls. He sat up, the tape still playing in his mind. The trees remember. The forest keeps everything. Around 2 a.m., he grabbed his flashlight and went outside. The air was damp, and the soil smelled of rust. The forest loomed quiet, alert, waiting. As his light swept over the nearest trunks, he saw old carvings, initials, dates, shapes half swallowed by bark. But then, just beyond the reach of light, a mark caught his eye. It wasn't carved. It was burned. A symbol, a circle divided by 3 uneven lines, like branches splitting from a root, and beneath it, barely visible in the bark, H.M. Henry's breath caught. His initials. He stepped back. No, it couldn't be. He'd never been here before. The wind rose suddenly, sharp and cold, threading through the leaves like a whispering choir. He turned the flashlight toward the sound. Nothing but empty branches swaying. Yet, for the briefest moment, he thought he saw the outline of a figure standing between the trees, tall, still, watching. The beam flickered. The figure dissolved. Henry ran back to the cabin. Inside, the clock ticked louder than usual. The recorder was still on the table, but now the play button was pressed down. He hadn't touched it. The tape hissed. Then a voice, his own. "Henry, don't go back into the woods." His stomach dropped. He stopped the tape, ejecting it with shaking hands. The reel inside was warped, slightly melted as though it had been burned from within. He backed away from the desk. Something was wrong. Not just with the recording, with the timeline of everything. The woods had his initials. The tape had his voice. The story was folding in on itself, and he didn't know where the edges began or ended anymore. That night, he tried to destroy the recorder. He threw it into the fireplace, watched as the plastic softened and twisted under the heat. For a moment, the hiss stopped. The room felt lighter. Then, from within the flames, came a faint click, and the whisper returned. "You weren't supposed to do that." Henry stumbled back. His heart pounded so hard it blurred his vision. The whisper grew clearer, layered a dozen overlapping voices, all saying the same thing in different tones, different rhythms. "You weren't supposed to do that. You weren't supposed to. You weren't." The recorder cracked open in the fire. A wisp of black smoke drifted upward, curling toward the ceiling like a hand reaching. Henry fled to the porch. The forest was completely still. No wind, no insects, no sound. Only the distant ticking of the clock, echoing faintly through the open window, each second louder than the last. When he looked down, his reflection in the porch glass door stared back, but its mouth was moving, whispering words he couldn't hear. He stepped closer. The reflection smiled. Morning came gray and heavy. Henry didn't remember falling asleep, but he woke up sitting at the desk, the recorder back in front of him, untouched, unburned, as though the night had never happened. A new tape lay beside it. The label, handwritten in faded ink, the third warning, and beneath it, the same symbol, the circle with branching lines drawn in fresh black marker. Henry stared at it for a long time. Outside, the forest waited. He thought of the voice, the one that had said not to rewind, not to listen twice. He thought of the reflection's smile, the whisper that came from nowhere. He pressed play. The tape hissed. Then, in that same trembling voice, not his, not hers, came the words, "The Guardian saw you. You can't leave now." A pause. Then softer. "Before the end, there's one more message." Henry turned off the recorder, the sound of his own breath filling the silence. He was no longer sure if he was the listener or the next voice waiting to be found. And somewhere outside, just beyond the edge of hearing, the hum began again, low, gentle, patient, as though the forest itself had started recording. The mirror wasn't always there. Henry was sure of that. It appeared one morning, leaning against the far wall beside the window, tall, narrow, and rimmed with a frame of wood so dark it looked almost wet. He didn't remember bringing it into the cabin. He didn't remember ever owning one. Yet when he saw his reflection in it, there was something deeply familiar, like a dream he had half forgotten, returning with quiet certainty. He touched the glass. It was cold, colder than the air, colder than it should have been. And for a brief, impossible moment, his reflection didn't move. For the rest of that day, Henry couldn't stop thinking about the mirror. He tried to distract himself with coffee, with work, with notes about the strange tapes, but every few minutes his eyes would drift back toward it. He thought about moving it outside, maybe covering it, but something in him resisted a strange pull, almost like guilt, as if the mirror wanted to be seen. By dusk, the hum had returned. It wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside the cabin, coming from somewhere deeper under the floorboards maybe, or behind the walls. He turned off every device, every light, every source of sound, but the hum stayed, low, steady, and patient. When he finally looked at the mirror again, his reflection was smiling. He wasn't. He didn't panic at first. Instead, he walked slowly toward it, convincing himself it was some trick of the light, a glitch of perception, exhaustion, imagination. He'd been sleeping less, after all. The mind could make shadows speak when the silence got too heavy, but the smile remained, a faint curve of the mouth, soft and knowing. And as Henry watched, his reflection raised one hand, not quite a wave, not quite a warning, just a gesture that said, "You see me now." The hum deepened. He turned away, heart pounding. When he glanced back, the mirror was empty, not shattered, not gone, just blank. A perfect pane of glass reflecting nothing at all, not the room, not the light, not him, only darkness. He slept on the couch that night, or tried to. The ticking clock was too loud, the shadows too alive. At some point past midnight, he heard the faintest whisper, that same soft tone from the tapes. Trembling, human. "Don't let it in." Henry sat up. The voice had come from the direction of the mirror. He turned on the lamp. The mirror stood still in its corner, dark as a well. He could almost see movement within. Not reflections, not forms, just depth. Like the glass wasn't showing him the room, but something behind it. He stepped closer, and there in that infinite black he saw her, the woman from the first tape, her face pale, eyes wide, hair floating as if underwater. She was mouthing something he couldn't hear. Then, faintly, the surface of the mirror rippled, and for a moment, he thought he saw another face beside hers, his own. He stumbled back, tripping over the chair. The hum spiked, and the lamp flickered violently. The air in the cabin thickened, pressing against him, humming through him. Then, just as quickly, it stopped. Silence. When he dared to look again, the mirror was just a mirror. His reflection was his own, tired, frightened, small. Morning came, colorless. The forest was still, as if it, too, was waiting. Henry felt hollow, his thoughts slow, his heartbeat sluggish. He noticed new marks on his forearm, faint smudges, like fingerprints pressed into skin. He didn't remember falling asleep. He didn't remember dreaming. He tried to call someone, anyone, but the phone gave only static, the same hiss that opened each tape. That's when he saw it. The recorder had moved. It was no longer on the desk, but directly beneath the mirror, as though something had placed it there during the night. A fresh tape waited inside. No label. Just a single mark on the reel, a circle with branching lines. He pressed play. Click. Then the voice, low, distant, trembling. "You burned one of us, Henry." He froze. The reflection remembers. Every act leaves a mark. Every mark calls the guardian. How? He could hear breathing on the tape, slow, steady, almost in sync with his own. You can still undo it, but you must listen carefully. A pause. When the mirror calls your name, answer only once. Then static, louder, angrier, almost alive. Henry stopped the tape. His hands were slick with sweat. He didn't understand, not fully, but part of him did. The reflection remembers. He turned toward the mirror. It was no longer blank. His reflection was there, standing a little too still, mouth open just slightly, as if in mid-speech. And then, faintly, he heard it, his own voice. Henry. He ran, out the door, through the cold air, down the narrow path that cut between the trees. The hum followed him, vibrating in the soil, echoing through the leaves. Somewhere behind him, he thought he heard the cabin door creak open. He didn't look back. He ran until he reached the clearing, where the ground dipped into a small hollow filled with fog. In the center stood an old well, half collapsed, its stones slick with moss. And there, carved into one of those stones, was the same circle symbol, the same as the mirror's frame, the same as the tapes. He knelt beside it, breath sharp and shallow. The air around the well felt different, thicker, almost electric. He could hear the faint echo of his name from within. Henry. The voice was distant, but layered. 100 tones of himself overlapping, calling from below. He peered inside. Nothing but black water. And yet, just for a moment, he saw the reflection again. Not in the water's surface, but deep beneath it. His face, staring up, lips moving. He couldn't hear the words, but he knew what they meant. Let me out. When Henry returned to the cabin, the mirror was gone. In its place, the wall was cracked, split open, like the wood had rotted from within. The recorder was still running, spooling endlessly without sound. He lifted it. The reel turned smooth and silent, as if recording nothing. But when he held it close to his ear, he could hear the faintest whisper. It's not the reflection that's hollow, Henry. Oppose it. It's you. He dropped the recorder. For a long time, he stood there, trembling, listening to the hum fade into a pulse. The air inside the cabin shifted heavy, wet, waiting. When he looked toward the window, the glass shimmered. A face stared back. Not his, not hers. Something older, watching and smiling. That night, the forest breathed. The trees leaned closer, their branches touching the cabin roof like fingers tracing a heartbeat. Henry sat by the cold fireplace, the ruined recorder beside him whispering faintly in the static. He no longer tried to sleep. He no longer tried to leave. Outside, in the dark, the Guardian moved slow, deliberate, soundless. Its reflection slid across the window panes like oil, and somewhere deep in the glass, something began to knock. 3 times. Uneven. Too close. Henry turned his head, breath trembling. He whispered, softly, as if speaking to a late-night listener who might still be out there somewhere. If you find this recording, don't come here. He looked toward the cracked wall. The mirror's frame was visible again, faintly glimmering behind the wood. The hum returned. Low. Constant. Patient. Then a voice, not from the mirror, not from the recorder, but from everywhere at once, murmured, "The reflection's ready." The cabin was quiet again. No hum. No ticking clock. No voice. Only the wind pressing against the windows like a heartbeat that had finally learned to rest. Henry sat in the center of the room, surrounded by the things that had once belonged to him. The recorder, the broken lamp, the burned tapes, now only shadows of what they had been. The air had changed. It was denser, colder, alive with something that felt like memory. He had not left the cabin in days, perhaps weeks. Time was a shape now, not a line. It curved back on itself, folding into the same moments over and over, the sound of the first tape, the sight of the mirror, the whisper of his own name, and always that feeling that he was not alone. The mirror had returned the night before. It stood again by the window, though Henry swore he had seen it splintered to dust only hours earlier. Its frame gleamed wetly in the moonlight, like the surface of a living thing. The glass was not smooth anymore, it pulsed faintly, breathing in rhythm with him. When he looked into it, he saw himself, but not quite. His reflection blinked a heartbeat slower. Its mouth opened just as his closed. Its eyes followed him with reverence, or pity, or hunger, he couldn't tell which. He had stopped trying to understand. Instead, he whispered to it, because he needed to, because silence was worse. "What are you?" he asked. The reflection tilted its head. Then, slowly, it raised a hand palm open, as if inviting him to match it. And when Henry's hand met the cold glass, he felt warmth, not his own. He began to dream differently after that. No longer fragments or whispers, these dreams had weight, structure, rhythm. He was walking through the same woods, though they were darker now, heavier. The trees leaned inward, whispering words he could almost recognize. He reached a clearing, and in the center stood a pool of black water. The surface rippled. His reflection rose from it, drenched in shadow, eyes glowing faintly from within. When it spoke, it did not move its lips. The words arrived directly in his head. "You're close." "Close to what?" he whispered. "To remembering." "Remembering what? Who's telling this story?" Henry woke with the taste of earth in his mouth. The mirror glowed softly in the corner, humming a note so low it felt like it was coming from beneath his ribs. He tried one last time to destroy it. He threw a blanket over it, struck it with the metal poker from the fireplace, even dragged it toward the door. But the moment the frame touched the threshold, it grew impossibly heavy, rooting itself into the floor like a tree. And then, from beneath the blanket, came a voice, soft, calm, familiar. "Why leave now? You've come so far." He froze. "It's not me you're seeing, Henry." The voice continued, almost tender. "It's what you've hidden." Hidden. Every lie leaves a reflection. Every fear leaves a shape. The blanket fell away on its own. In the mirror, his reflection was gone. In its place stood the woman from the tape, her face calm now, not pleading. Her eyes were clear, and her lips were curved in the faintest smile. "You opened the way," she whispered. "You remembered me." Henry took a step forward. "Who are you?" "Once, I was the guardian." He stared. "Guardian of what?" She smiled wider. "Of those who listen too closely." The hum deepened. The cabin shuddered. "And now," she said, "you take my place." The mirror cracked. Not a clean break, but a spreading web of fractures that crawled outward like veins of light. Behind the glass, shapes began to move, outlines of people, hundreds of them, drifting, whispering. He recognized some of their faces from the photos scattered in the cabin, from the notebooks, from the tapes. All the voices he had heard, all the ones who had listened. And in the reflection, Henry saw himself standing among them, but not on the same side. He was behind the glass now, faint, translucent, eyes wide with the dawning realization of something irreversible. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not." The light flared. He reached toward the glass, but his fingers passed through as if through water. The surface rippled, and the room tilted around him. The hum became a single, deep tone, a sound like the inside of a heartbeat. "The guardian remembers," the voice said. And then, silence. When the neighbors found the cabin weeks later, it was empty. The door was locked from the inside. The mirror stood against the wall, cracked in a perfect circle at its center. No sign of Henry, only the faint scent of smoke and damp earth. They took the tapes, the notebooks, the recorder. None of them worked anymore. When played, all they produced was static and a low, rhythmic hum. But one tape, the last one, held something else. A voice, calm, slow, intimate. "If you're hearing this," it said, "you've already seen your reflection. Don't touch it. Don't listen too long, because that's how it begins. Pause. The story isn't about me. It's about the next voice, the next mirror, the next listener. The guardian watches. And yet, sometimes, late at night, when the fog rolls through the pines and the static hum returns to the radio, people swear they can hear something beneath it. A faint whisper, layered and patient. Tell me your name. If they answer, even softly, the glass nearby trembles, and somewhere far away, in a cabin long forgotten by maps, a man's voice sighs not with fear, but with something like relief. Finally, the scarecrow's silence. The train left me in the middle of nowhere. A rusted sign marked Hollow's End, a name the locals probably whispered with half a smile and half a prayer. Beyond the cracked station, the land unfolded like a dream that had forgotten how to wake wide, golden, and strangely still. The wind moved through the stalks of corn in long, deliberate breaths. It sounded less like weather, and more like something breathing back. I came for a legend, the story of the Guardian. They said she once watched over these fields a woman named Alara, accused of witchcraft, burned and buried beneath her own land. Her husband had built a scarecrow over her grave to keep the birds from stealing her rest. The villagers said he cursed himself that day. Every year the harvest grew richer, but the men who worked these fields died younger, whispering her name as their eyes went white. I didn't believe in curses. I believed in stories. That was my work, to chase the whispers that history tried to bury. I'd written about haunted bridges, deathless sailors, and forest shrines that bled during storms. But this was something older. A rural haunting, people called it. An echo of guilt that refused to stay dead. The first person I met was an old woman sitting on her porch, shelling peas into a cracked bowl. Her fingers were knotted like the roots of a tree, and her eyes were as pale as the fog that hung low on the fields. "You're here for her, aren't you?" she asked before I even spoke. I froze. "The scarecrow?" She nodded. "Don't call her that, she hears it." The air thickened between us. "She?" I asked carefully. "You mean Elara?" The old woman's lips pressed into a line. "We don't say her name after sundown." I laughed softly, trying to lighten it. "Superstition, then." Her gaze didn't waver. "Boy, superstition's just memory that learned how to hide." She pointed her knife toward the horizon, toward the endless gold of the field. "You want your story? Go after sunset. That's when she's listening." The sun went down fast in Hollow's End. It didn't sink, it fell. By the time I reached the fence that separated the village from the fields, the light had gone the color of old blood. The scarecrow stood in the distance, a lonely silhouette against the dying sky. I climbed over the fence. The dry grass crackled under my boots, every step swallowed by the whispering of the wind. The closer I got, the colder it felt, like the air itself was thinning. When I reached it, I stopped breathing. It wasn't the usual thing, not just rags on a cross. The figure was tall, too tall. Its dress was torn lace, its head wrapped in burlap stitched with a single line down the center, like a closed mouth. Straw hands hung limp at its sides, and from its chest dangled a charm made of silver wire twisted into the shape of a woman's eye. I lifted my camera. The flash went off, and the scarecrow moved, just slightly, enough for the fabric to sigh, enough for me to freeze where I stood. "Hello?" I said stupidly. The air didn't move. Then, something shifted in the crops behind me. A faint rustle, the stalks bending as though something walked slowly between them. I turned, shining my light. Nothing. When I looked back, the scarecrow's head was tilted, just slightly. I blinked. My camera slipped in my hand. It had been facing straight ahead before. I was certain of it. Now, it looked down at me. The stitched line across its face curved slightly, as though beneath the burlap something was trying to smile. The first whisper came when I stepped back. Soft, barely audible. It wasn't words, not at first. Just a vibration like the air itself humming through teeth. Then it shaped into a woman's voice, low and calm. "Do you hear it?" I froze. "Who's there?" "You shouldn't be here after dark." The light flickered. My flashlight dimmed to a weak pulse. Leave before she wakes. I spun toward the sound, but it came from nowhere and everywhere. From the wind, from the earth, from inside the straw figure that stood impossibly still. My pulse thundered. "Who are you?" I shouted. For a moment, nothing. Then a faint laugh, distant, hollow. "You already know my name." The ground trembled beneath my feet. A low vibration rolled through the soil, deep as breath. The crops bowed slightly, all in the same direction toward the scarecrow. And for the first time, I noticed what the charm around its neck truly was. It wasn't silver wire. It was bone. I don't remember how long I stood there. Minutes, hours, the night in Hollow's End was a thing without clocks. When I finally turned to go, the whisper came again. "You came to find me." I stopped walking. Then find me. The wind surged, lifting the stalks into a spiral. I shielded my face, and when it passed, the world had changed. The field was endless now. No path, no horizon. Only the sound of dry rustling that never stopped the whisper of something moving just out of sight. And somewhere far behind me, I heard it, the slow, dragging sound of straw brushing against earth, as if something that had been tied to its post was finally learning how to walk. The field had no end. Silas told himself that at least 10 times before he began to believe it. The first few minutes he thought he was merely lost. Country fields could be deceptive. The paths wound, the rows curved, and after an hour you could end up facing the same tree from a different angle and swear it had moved. But this was not the countryside anymore. This was something that had turned inward on itself. He could still see the scarecrow at the center. Or maybe it just followed him. He had first approached it under a dim sun, snapping pictures for his folklore project, rural icons, and the fear of the watchful figure. The thing had fascinated him. Burlap stitched with something darker than twine, straw packed too tightly in the torso like flesh had been used for stuffing. The locals called it the Guardian. He had laughed softly when they said it shouldn't be approached at dusk. Now dusk was long gone. The wind moved through the corn, no, not corn, barley, wheat. He couldn't even tell anymore. Every rustle sounded like a whisper too close to his ear. Every stalk seemed taller than before, brushing his arms, closing in. Silas turned on his flashlight. The beam cut a pale corridor through gold and shadow. The air shimmered with dust motes, turning his breath visible, and for a moment he saw something shift a line in the field, bending, as though the stalks themselves recoiled from the light. He stepped forward. Crunch. Another step. Crunch. He turned left, then right, then another turn, trying to orient himself toward the road. His boots sank deeper into the soil each time, as though the earth had softened beneath him. "Okay," he muttered, voice shaky but pretending calm. "Just retrace your steps. You came from the North Ridge, past the irrigation trench, right?" He raised his phone. No signal. The compass app spun uselessly. When he lowered it, the flashlight caught the scarecrow again directly ahead. He froze. He hadn't turned around. He had walked in a circle without moving backward, and yet there it was, head tilted, straw hair hanging like rotten silk, arms outstretched as though in an endless welcome. Silas took a deep breath. "It's just perspective," he whispered. "It's just..." Something laughed in the wind, a low, breathy sound, like a woman chuckling through a cracked throat. The laugh seemed to come from the scarecrow, then from behind him, then from all sides. The rustling grew louder. He ran. The flashlight bounced wildly, slicing through the stalks that seemed to part and then close again after him. He could hear his heartbeat louder than his steps. He thought he saw a way out, a thinning of the field, a gap, but when he burst through, he stumbled right back into the same clearing. The scarecrow waited. This time, the head was slightly lower, as if it had bowed in greeting. The tape recorder on his belt clicked as his elbow brushed it. Reflexively, Silas hit the record button. His voice trembled. "Field study, 10:47 p.m. I appear to be disoriented within the boundaries of the crop area surrounding the object known locally as the Guardian. Navigation appears compromised. Visibility limited. Object continues to appear within line of sight, regardless of direction traveled. He stopped, listening to the playback. In the background of the recording, under his words, was another sound faint, overlapping his own breathing. It was someone whispering, slow and wet, syllables curling like smoke. He turned off the recorder. No, no, no. He looked around. The wind had stopped. The world had gone still, too still. Even the insects had gone silent. He could hear something else now. A dragging sound, like fabric scraping dirt. It came from the direction of the scarecrow. He didn't want to look, but his body betrayed him. His head turned, slow as a hinge. The scarecrow's shadow was wrong. It wasn't stretching away from the moonlight, it stretched toward him. Long fingers of black sliding across the soil like roots searching for a throat. Silas stepped back. His heel caught something soft and broke through its straw, old and wet, filled with something sticky. He looked down and saw a bundle of fabric half buried a piece of an old dress. Blue once, now the color of dried blood. He yanked his foot free. The ground made a sucking sound. He started walking again, not running this time. Running had no effect here. He felt the air changing, the rows of crop bending ever so slightly, forming new paths ahead of him. He whispered to himself, a mantra against panic. You're just tired. You're just hallucinating. But the scarecrow was whispering too now. He could hear her. A voice like silk dragged through mud, words curling inside his skull. You're walking in circles, Silas. You've always been walking in circles. He froze again. How do you know my name? He whispered. The scarecrow didn't answer, not in words. The stalks around him shifted violently, whipping in one direction like a sudden storm had passed through only that patch. He turned and saw impossibly the outline of a door, just a few feet ahead, built from bundles of wheat tied together. A door where there had never been one. It swayed slightly in the night breeze. Every part of him screamed, don't open it. But when he looked back, the scarecrow was gone. Only the post remained. The wooden cross splintered and empty. The burlap body had vanished. Silas approached the door. His breath shook. He reached out, hand trembling, fingertips brushing the rough straw handle. It felt warm. He pulled. The door opened onto darkness. Not black, something thicker, something that swallowed the light from his flashlight. He took a step inside. The air changed immediately. It was cooler, damp. The smell of earth and mold filled his nose. He realized he was underground. The floor sloped downward, dirt turning to stone, like an old cellar. He aimed his flashlight forward. At the end of the tunnel, something metallic glinted. A lantern, maybe. Or a latch. He moved closer, but every step felt heavier, as though the ground wanted to hold him in place. When he reached the metal, he realized it wasn't a lantern. It was a hook, and hanging from it was a strip of burlap, old and torn, soaked in something dark. His recorder clicked again on his belt. Without touching it, it started playing back. Not his voice. Hers. You took his life from me, Silas. You took his words, his stories, his truth, and you call it research. He froze. The voice was familiar. It wasn't just some ghost from the legend. It was someone he knew, someone he'd interviewed. The woman from the last village, the one who'd told him not to come here, the one who'd said, they don't bury their dead in the ground anymore. They bury them in the scarecrows. Silas dropped the recorder. The tape inside spun on its own, hissing. He shone the flashlight ahead and saw something impossible. The field, above him, reflected on the stone ceiling like a mirror made of soil and shadow. And in that mirror, field, he saw himself, standing in the same place. Only he wasn't moving. The mirrored Silas stood motionless, straw jutting from his sleeves, eyes stitched shut. He stumbled backward, gasping. His boot hit the recorder again, and the playback distorted, repeating her voice over and over, faster each time. You call it research, you call it research, you call it. He turned and ran back up the tunnel, bursting through the straw door, back into the open air, if it could still be called air. The field had changed again. Now, every stalk leaned in one direction, all bowing toward the center, toward the scarecrow. It had returned. It stood there, arms spread, head tilted. Its sackcloth face looked different now, stretched tighter, human somehow. Its mouth, if it could be called, that was slightly open, revealing something red inside. He couldn't move. He could only listen as the voice came again. Softer this time, almost tender. "You should have listened, Silas. The field remembers." The scarecrow raised one arm slow, deliberate, and pointed directly at him. Then, behind him, the rows began to close, the crops intertwining like fingers, sealing him in. Hours later, or maybe seconds, Silas stopped fighting. He sank to his knees, the soil damp beneath him, the smell of rot filling his lungs. The flashlight flickered and died. Darkness, and the soft whisper of straw sliding against fabric. Then a sound like a heartbeat, deep in the ground. Thump, thump, thump. Each beat echoed through the field, each one slower, heavier, until the wind returned, carrying the faintest words through the barley. "Stay. The maze isn't done with you yet." The night refused to end. The moon hovered in the same place it had hours ago, trapped in a gray halo above the field. The stalks didn't move with the wind anymore. They shivered, as though breathing. Silas didn't remember how long he had wandered since the cellar. His boots were coated with mud and something that wasn't mud. He no longer spoke to his recorder. He'd stopped trusting it when it began answering him in another voice. Now he just walked, one slow, deliberate step at a time. The sound of his breathing was the only thing left that felt real. But then he saw her. The scarecrow stood no longer in the distance. It was in the path ahead, just a few paces away. The lantern light of the half-moon cast its shape in harsh relief. The burlap face, the black button eyes, the slack mouth, stuffed with straw. Only now, the head moved. It turned slowly, until it faced him. Silas froze. He could hear the soft stretch of fabric, the whisper of straw shifting inside as though something beneath it exhaled. I know who you are," he said, voice hoarse. "You're not a guardian. You're not a curse. You're her." The words came out as a confession. He didn't even know who he was speaking to anymore, the scarecrow, the woman buried inside it, or the guilt that had followed him here. Silas took a trembling step closer. "You were real once, weren't you? They accused you, called you a witch. And your husband," he swallowed. The truth burned his throat. "He killed you." The scarecrow didn't move, but the air thickened around him. The silence pressed in. The rustle of stalks became a low hum, like 1,000 voices murmuring just out of reach. He lifted his flashlight, but the beam flickered, weak and feverish. The scarecrow tilted its head. The shadows beneath its chin stretched, forming what looked almost like a smile. Then, without warning, it spoke. The voice wasn't human. It was the sound of air moving through a torn throat. But the tone was unmistakably female, soft and heavy, with something close to sorrow. "He made me stay. He made me watch." Silas stepped back, trembling. The voice came again, clearer now, carried by the night wind. "He said the land needed a keeper, that my eyes would guard the harvest, that the field must always see." Silas's flashlight slipped from his grip, falling into the dirt. The beam angled upward, throwing light across the scarecrow's midsection, where the burlap had begun to sag and tear. Something beneath it moved. A pale hand. Human, thin, bone-white, breaking through the stitching like it was breathing. Silas wanted to run, but he didn't. He just stood there, paralyzed, watching as the hand flexed slow, deliberate, and pointed toward the ground at his feet. He followed the gesture. The soil there was loose, darker than the rest, freshly turned, and scattered in the dirt were bones not large, not whole, but small fragments, the color of old ivory. Some still had shreds of fabric clinging to them. A wedding ring glinted among them, Silas fell to his knees. Dear God, the Scarecrow's voice came again, closer now, right beside him, though he hadn't seen it move. He said he'd bury the sin in the soil, but the soil remembers. The whisper brushed his ear like breath. He turned sharply and found himself face to face with her. The Scarecrow had stepped down from its post. It stood only a few feet away, towering but frail, its head cocked, the straw shifting beneath the sackcloth skin as though muscles twitched underneath. Its left arm still hung stiffly from the wooden beam impaled through its shoulder. Her face, the face beneath the burlap, was trying to surface. The stitches strained. A single black button fell off, revealing an eye beneath cloudy gray, but alive. Silas couldn't move. I didn't come here to disturb you, he whispered. I just wanted to understand. The Scarecrow's voice replied. For a moment, it sounded almost kind. You always want to understand. You dig, and never bury. The stalks around them began to sway again, though there was no wind. The sound grew like breathing all around. Silas looked up, realizing the entire field had changed shape. The paths were closing. The walls of crop were forming a circle, tightening around him and the Scarecrow, trapping them together in a ring of whispering gold. He stumbled backward. Please, I can help you. I can tell your story. The Scarecrow's head tilted, almost pitying. You already did. What? The voice grew clearer, sharper. You told it wrong. And then, before he could react, the Scarecrow lunged. The motion wasn't fast, it was inevitable. Straw and fabric scraped against his coat as one hand grabbed his wrist. Another, too cold, too real, pressed against his chest. Silas struggled, but she didn't strike him. She only held him there, pressing her forehead against his, her breath hot and damp with the smell of soil. Feel it, she whispered. The weight you carry, the lies you planted. A rush of images flooded his mind, the interviews, the photos, the stories he'd twisted to fit the expectations of city readers. Faces of the people he'd studied, voices he'd trimmed down into caricatures of rural superstition. He had always told himself it was preservation, not theft. But now the field knew otherwise. The Scarecrow's grip tightened. He could feel the straw seeping into his sleeves, threading up his arms, scratching beneath his skin. He looked down and saw fine yellow strands sprouting from his pores. No, please. Her voice turned almost loving. Every field needs a guardian. He fell to the ground, convulsing. The soil opened beneath him, not wide, not deep, just enough to hold him in place. The stalks bent low, brushing his face like hands closing over his eyes. Silas screamed. But the sound didn't travel far. It sank, down into the dirt, and the Scarecrow, or whatever wore her shape, knelt beside him, stroking his hair with a hand that left trails of straw behind. Sleep, she whispered. The harvest remembers. Then she stood. The moon above the field flickered, as though veiled by clouds that weren't there. The air stilled again. The field went quiet. When she turned away, another shape had begun to rise from the soil. It was taller than Silas, its outline rough and unformed, but its face, if one could call it that, already bore the faint stitching of burlap. Its arms hung open, mirroring hers, and when she stepped back, it stayed standing, a new Scarecrow. By dawn, the field was calm. The villagers passing on the ridge said the fog that morning was heavier than usual. One of them swore he saw two Scarecrows instead of one old, one new, both standing side by side, their shadows long and thin in the mist. But when he came back that evening, only one remained, and its head was tilted in a different direction. Morning came, but light meant nothing here. The fog over the valley never thinned. It rolled and pulsed like breath, coating every blade of wheat in a sheen of dull gray. The crows hadn't returned since that night. Even the wind had stopped asking questions. Only silence lived here now, the kind that feels aware. Silas didn't wake up so much as surface. His eyes opened to a sky the color of ash, and for a long moment, he couldn't tell if he was lying down or hanging. The horizon stretched in every direction, no roads, no farmhouse, no sign of where the world began or ended. When he tried to move, the rustle beneath him wasn't soil, it was straw. He looked down. His coat, once brown, was matted with golden threads that bristled when he breathed. His fingers cracked when he flexed them, spilling dust instead of blood. Beneath the skin, he could hear something shifting, a dry, papery whisper with every heartbeat. Or maybe there was no heartbeat anymore. The thought came slow, detached, as if it belonged to someone else. He tried to recall what had happened to the Scarecrow's hand, her voice, the ground swallowing him whole. But memory was just noise now, scattered pieces floating through static. He turned his head and saw her. She stood a few yards away, at the center of the field, exactly where she had always been, the original Scarecrow. The sackcloth face hung in tatters, the straw spilling from her chest like the remnants of a wound. Yet she wasn't broken. She looked content. The field bent around her in a slow ripple, the wheat leaning toward her as though listening. Silas tried to speak. No sound came out, only a faint exhale, like a sigh through hollow wood. Then she moved. Not much, just a tilt of the head, the same patient gesture that had haunted his dreams. The space between them shrank, though neither took a step. The air itself seemed to draw them together. Her voice rose in the wind, quiet but unmistakable. You stayed. He blinked. Tried again to speak. The sound that escaped his mouth was dry and rusted, but it formed words. You wanted me to. Then, the Scarecrow's shape trembled slightly, as if amused or saddened. I wanted someone to understand, but understanding comes with roots. Silas looked down. Around his boots, the soil pulsed faintly. The stalks near him were braided together, their roots wound tight around his ankles. The more he moved, the deeper they held. He stared at his hands. The skin had begun to fray at the wrists, revealing tufts of straw that grew thicker with each twitch. A cold realization settled in. He wasn't trapped in the field. He was the field. The voice of the Scarecrow came again, this time inside his skull, not his ears. The land doesn't forget. You took what wasn't yours, their stories, their grief, their ghosts, and turned them into tales. You fed on their memory. I wanted to tell the truth, Silas whispered, though the words cracked like old bark. Truth is soil, she replied. You plant it, and it grows what you deserve. A gust swept across the field. The wheat bent low, then rose again, and with it came a wave of whispering, countless voices overlapping. He could hear names, cries, laughter, prayers, centuries of the dead tangled together in the roots. Somewhere among them, his name joined the chorus. Silas. It wasn't her voice anymore. It was his mother's, his father's, friends, lovers, all of them calling from beneath the ground, soft as the rustle of leaves. He clutched his head, but his fingers only tore more straw loose. The whispers grew louder. Silas, Silas. Stay. Then silence again. He looked up. The Scarecrow was closer now, standing only an arm's length away. Her face, what was left of it, was no longer frightening. It was mournful. The button eyes gleamed with moisture, as if they were weeping black tears. Why me? He croaked. Her head tilted. Because you listened. She lifted one hand, reaching for his face. The touch was gentle, almost tender, but where her fingers brushed his skin, the straw beneath his cheeks caught fire. Not with flame, but with light. His body began to glow faintly, as if lit from within. The Scarecrow stepped back. Every story needs a keeper, she murmured. Someone to remember when the rest forget. He wanted to protest, to tell her he hadn't asked for this, but his mouth wouldn't move anymore. The straw was already sealing it shut. The light within him dimmed to a dull amber, the color of dying dusk, and then he heard it, the sound that ended all argument. Footsteps, human ones, from far beyond the hill. Voices carried, the local farmers, the ones who always came after sunrise to check the soil. Silas's heart, or whatever beat inside him, twisted with panic. He didn't want them to see him like this, but he couldn't move. The field responded before he could. The wheat around him swelled upward, growing taller, thicker, weaving into a cocoon of rustling gold. The stalk sealed him in until no light passed through, and from outside the scarecrow whispered, "Rest. They'll only see what they need to." When the farmers arrived that morning, they found the field untouched but strangely still. No wind, no birds. The crops seemed too perfect, aligned in neat, unnatural symmetry. Where Silas's tent and camera had once been, they found nothing but a single notebook. Its pages were blank, except for one entry, scrawled in red dirt: "The field keeps what it's owed." They also noticed something odd about the scarecrow. Its posture had changed. The right arm now hung slightly forward, bent at the elbow as though gesturing to something only it could see, and its face, beneath the sackcloth, bore the faintest outline of a man's features, as if the straw itself had learned to mimic memory. That night, as dusk spread like ink across the valley, the field began to hum again. It wasn't wind, it wasn't insects. It was lower, deeper, a rhythm like breathing. And if one stood close enough, just under the hum, they could hear a voice, a man's voice, soft, uneasy, but still telling a story. The field remembers. It never forgets. Not what it takes, not what it gives. And sometimes it listens back. The scarecrow watched over the field, silent, still, until the wind blew again. And for one brief moment, it seemed to turn its head, not toward the town, but toward whoever was listening. The zombies' lament. Jared had always said the earth spoke to him, not with words, but with a kind of pressure beneath his boots. A pulse, a tremor, a quiet promise that something waited just a little deeper down. That was what brought him to the edge of Hollowvale, where even the birds refused to sing and the miners' graves lay half swallowed by moss. The locals had a name for that slope of land, the Morning Pit. They told stories of men who went down there and came back with eyes like dull stones, their voices gone brittle from breathing the cursed air. But Jared was not one to scare easily. He had debts to pay. He had hunger gnawing at him harder than any ghost. He'd heard a rumor, a vein of rare ore buried under the abandoned shafts of the Morning Pit, something luminous, unlike any stone known to miners. They called it deadlight. The old alchemists had chased it once, claiming it could turn flesh into gold or gold into ruin. Jared only half believed that part. But still, he packed his pickaxe, his lantern, and a flask of stale coffee, and he walked into the valley where the fog rolled like breath from a buried god. The first few hours passed in silence. The ground was soft, the soil damp enough to cling to his boots. Every swing of his pick echoed back like someone else was swinging with him. He told himself it was only the walls breathing, the earth adjusting to his presence. But when he stopped to catch his breath, he thought he heard another rhythm beneath his own heartbeat. Slow, heavy, deliberate, like the sound of stone shifting far below. That was when his pick struck something that wasn't stone, a dull metallic clang, not the high-pitched ring of ore. He knelt and brushed away the dirt with his gloved hand. Beneath a layer of silt and gravel, a flat surface revealed itself smooth, pale, and veined like marble. A slab. He cleared more of the earth, his pulse rising. The slab wasn't part of the mine floor. It was a lid, a cover of some kind, carved with grooves too precise to be natural. He dug faster, until his shovel hit a hollow echo underneath. The sound rolled upward deep and wrong, and then he saw it, a faint line of dark liquid seeping from one corner of the slab. Not blood, not water, something thicker, shimmering faintly in the light of his lantern. He touched it, and his fingers went cold immediately, as if the heat had been stolen straight from his veins. When he wiped the residue on his pants, it hissed faintly. Jared stared at the slab for a long while, his breath forming fog in the still air. It wasn't a grave marker. It was a seal. He knew he should stop. He knew. But greed, once it has its teeth in a man, doesn't let go. He braced the edge of his pick beneath the seam and pried. The sound that followed was deep and aching, like something groaning from centuries of sleep. Dust exploded upward, and a rush of air spilled out, cold enough to sting his face. The lid slid aside an inch, then another, until the dark below yawned open. He lifted his lantern. The light barely pierced the gloom, but deep inside, he saw the shape of a coffin carved entirely from marble, inlaid with veins of metal. It wasn't buried in the ground so much as entombed in it, and there, across its lid, ran lines of the same liquid he'd seen earlier, now faintly glowing, like veins of black mercury. He crouched beside it, breath trembling. The carvings weren't words, not in any language he knew, but they flowed in patterns that drew the eye, twisting and curling like chains. The air pressed heavy. The silence deepened, and then came the sound, a whisper, first almost like wind through reeds. But there was no whine down here. Then a low thump, rhythmic, uneven, as if something beneath the coffin was knocking. Jared stumbled back, heart hammering. The sound came again, 3 knocks, soft but deliberate. He told himself it was his imagination, the earth settling, a trick of nerves. But then he saw the liquid on the coffin begin to tremble, to ripple outward like a pool disturbed by breath. The coffin moved, just slightly, enough to make dust fall from the ceiling. Enough to make Jared drop his lantern. The flame sputtered, caught, and steadied again, and that was when he saw the first crack form along the coffin's edge. It started as a thin black line, then another, and another. The veins of liquid flared faintly, glowing like veins of dying fire. The sound that followed was unbearable, a slow grind of stone against stone, like a throat clearing after centuries. The lid lifted, only a few inches, just enough for a wisp of mist to escape, thick and shimmering. It rolled along the floor, wrapping around Jared's boots like fingers. The cold that followed sank straight into his bones. He stumbled backward, tripping over a rock, but his eyes stayed fixed on that opening, the darkness within it deeper than any he'd ever seen. Then, from inside, came a sound that froze him entirely. A voice. Not a word, not exactly. More a moan, long and heavy, soaked with sorrow. It wasn't a creature's snarl or hunger. It was lamentation, something grieving. The mist thickened, spreading, and Jared could see now the faint shimmer of metal inside, the suggestion of armor. A hand, pale as ash and clad in blackened steel, pressed against the inside of the coffin lid. The fingers curled once, then withdrew, then silence. And just as suddenly as it began, the light in the liquid veins dimmed. The glow vanished. The stone went still. Jared waited, heart thundering, expecting the coffin to burst open, but nothing else moved. Only that lingering sense that something had noticed him, something that would not forget. He backed away slowly, grabbing his lantern and shovel. The tunnel behind him seemed longer than before, the shadows stretching and shifting as if to close in around him. When he finally reached the surface, the first drops of rain began to fall. The world outside seemed quieter than it should be, the forest still, the wind gone. He didn't look back, but even as he trudged down the path toward town, he swore he could feel the ground pulse beneath him again, faint but steady, like a heartbeat deep in the soil. And somewhere far behind him, in the bowels of the earth, came a sound he could not mistake, a breath, drawn slow and hollow, followed by that same low, mournful groan rising, echoing through the tunnels, carrying a grief that was older than men, older than the mine, older than the curse itself. Jared didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. The image of the stone coffin, the marble lid shuddering under his pickaxe, the dark liquid oozing out from the cracks had lodged itself behind his eyelids like something alive. Every time he blinked, he saw that thin thread of black seeping down the ridges of the stone, pulsing like a vein. He'd gone into that shaft alone. That was his first mistake. No one had touched the abandoned section of the Crescent Mine in nearly a century. The men said it was haunted. Cursed, they called it. Jared had laughed then, said a man who feared ghosts would never find gold. But he hadn't been searching for gold that day. He'd been chasing something rarer, a mineral with a blue shimmer that fetched more than diamonds in certain corners of the market. The kind that could change a life. He thought it had changed his. He didn't realize it would unmake it instead. By the time he staggered back to the surface, dusk had fallen. The air above ground felt thick, heavier than before. His boots sank deeper into the soil, as if the earth itself resisted him leaving. He kept glancing over his shoulder, not because he expected something to follow, but because it felt like it already had. Back at camp, the lantern swayed gently in the evening wind. The men were gone. They'd packed up hours ago when the storm rolled in. Jared sat by the dying fire, his hands trembling as he stared into the embers. He didn't notice the black dust on his skin until it began to burn. Not fire, not heat, but a cold burn, the kind that seeps inward, like frost spreading through bone. He rubbed at his wrist until the skin reddened. That's when he heard it. A low sound, a groan drawn out and hollow like wind through a narrow tunnel. It wasn't the wind. It had weight. It had grief. It rose from the earth beneath him, then faded before he could tell if it was real. He waited, breath held, eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the firelight. Nothing moved. And yet, everything did. The night seemed to shift around him, the trees bending ever so slightly, the grass whispering secrets and voices he couldn't quite make out. Jared told himself it was exhaustion. The air in those mines did strange things to a man's mind. Still, when he looked toward the slope of the hill, he saw something glinting faintly. A reflection, like light, bouncing off armor. He blinked, and it was gone. The next morning, the air was still. The world, silent. Even the birds had abandoned the ridge. Jared packed his tools and started down toward town, the satchel with the mineral samples slung over his shoulder. The bag felt heavier than usual. When he opened it halfway down the trail, he found the stones weren't shimmering anymore. They'd turned a dull, lifeless gray, and fine black veins had begun to spread across their surface like rot. He zipped the bag shut, didn't look again. The town of East Hollow sat quiet when he arrived. Windows shuttered, the scent of dust thickened the air. It was as if time had slowed there, too. He stopped by the trading post, but no one answered. Then he saw Miss Langley, the old widow who used to sell tea leaves by the porch. She was standing perfectly still by her door, one hand frozen mid-air, the cup she was holding tilted, the liquid within unmoving. "Ma'am?" Jared called. No answer. He took a step closer. The cup slipped from her fingers and hit the wooden floor, didn't shatter. It bounced. The sound it made was not porcelain, but stone. Jared froze. Her skin had turned gray, the lines of her face etched deep like cracks in marble. Her eyes, open wide, were not eyes anymore, only smooth stone sockets, staring endlessly at nothing. He stumbled backward. Every window on the street looked the same now. Shapes, figures frozen in place, as if the entire town had turned to statues overnight. He ran. By the time he reached the old inn, he could barely breathe. His throat felt tight, dry as ash. He slammed the door behind him and sank to the floor, shaking. The air inside was cooler, but it didn't comfort him. It smelled faintly metallic, not blood. Something older, deeper. That was when he heard it again. That same groan, closer this time. It echoed through the wooden beams, vibrating the dust loose from the rafters. Jared's eyes darted to the staircase. Each step creaked, slow and deliberate. He wanted to believe it was the wind. He wanted to believe a lot of things that weren't true, and then he saw it. A figure in the doorway, tall, slouched, wrapped in remnants of blackened armor that caught what little light there was. It stood unmoving for a long time, its face hidden under the shadow of an iron helm, and when it finally tilted its head, the sound that escaped its throat wasn't human. It was a sigh, the sound of something that had forgotten what it meant to breathe. Jared couldn't move. His body refused to obey. The thing stepped forward, slow and heavy, its boots sinking into the wooden floor as if it weighed more than it should. The air around it shimmered, warped, like heat rising from desert sand. And though he couldn't see its eyes, he felt them studying him, recognizing him. He'd woken it. He'd broken the seal. The creature raised its arm, the armor groaning as it moved, and something like black water dripped from the gaps in the plates. It didn't lunge. It didn't attack. Instead, it made a sound low, mournful, almost pleading. It sounded like a man weeping through metal. Jared took a step back. His heel caught on the rug, and he fell hard. The thing stopped moving. Its head tilted again, as if confused by his fear. Then, slowly, it turned toward the door, leaving behind a faint trail of that same black residue. It vanished into the street. Jared lay there, gasping, unsure whether to follow or flee. The weight of silence returned, pressing against his ribs. When he finally found the courage to look out the window, the figure was gone. But in its place, across the street, every statue, every frozen figure now faced the inn. All of them turned toward him. He didn't sleep that night either. He sat by the window until dawn, watching their rise and shift from black to gray, waiting for sound, for birds, for life. None came, and when the morning light finally broke, it carried no warmth. Only the faint outline of footprints, heavy, sunken, metallic, leading back toward the mines. It was calling him home. The town of Darlow was quiet now. Too quiet. Jared could hear it even through the thick fog that hung above the mining ridge, that absence of sound where life should have been. The streets were empty, doors locked, curtains drawn. And yet, as he walked through that silence, the air itself seemed to tremble, as if something inside the ground was whispering. He had come back with a pocket full of the strange mineral, glittering faintly in the lamplight. It shimmered blue under the mist, beautiful, alive, but the longer he looked at it, the more it pulsed, like a slow heartbeat. He hadn't told anyone where he'd found it. He'd only said it came from the lower tunnels. A miner's secret was often the only thing that could make him rich. But now, every step he took echoed differently. His boots struck the ground, and the sound lingered too long, as if the dirt had turned hollow. When he reached the tavern, it was closed. The door was nailed shut from the inside. He moved on to the doctor's office, the same. Then, the general store. Every building seemed sealed against the world. Only the faint smell of burning wood came from the blacksmith's workshop, where the coals had long gone cold. The first sign of life came from the well at the town square. Someone was sitting beside it. Jared slowed, then froze. It was old Mrs. Harrow, the herbalist. Her head was bowed, her hands folded in her lap. For a moment he thought she was praying. Then he saw the stone. Her fingers had turned gray, hard, brittle like marble. Her face still soft and expression was stiff, lifeless. She had been sitting there for hours, maybe days. The petrification had taken her mid-breath, mid-whisper. Jared stepped back, heart pounding. He didn't understand, not yet. But when he looked down at his hands, at the faint sheen that had begun to crawl along his fingertips, he knew. The stone dust, the quarries, the curse, the sickness had begun with him. He ran back to his cabin, slamming the door shut, gasping for air. His reflection in the mirror looked normal at first, pale, frightened, but still human. Then he saw the faint gray cracks tracing the veins in his neck, tiny, glittering like frost. He tore his shirt open and saw the same dust across his chest, moving with each heartbeat. He grabbed the satchel with the mineral and threw it into the fire. The blue flame flared instantly, filling the room with a chemical stench. It hissed like something alive, and for a moment, he thought he heard it scream. When the smoke cleared, the stones were gone, but the mark on his skin remained. That night, Jared didn't sleep. The wind outside had changed slower, heavier, as if dragging through the weight of invisible bodies. He kept hearing footsteps near the door, but every time he looked, no one was there. By dawn, he saw the first body in the street. It was Tomas, the smith's apprentice. He was standing upright, eyes open, mouth parted as if frozen mid-sentence. His skin had turned to stone, his pupils gray, his lips dusted in white. Jared didn't touch him. He didn't have to. The truth was already there, etched in that stillness. The sickness spread not by touch, but by presence. The air itself was tainted, poisoned by the minerals. and the creature the armored corpse he had released was nowhere to be found. 2 nights later, Jared found the journal. It was hidden in the drawer of the old alchemist's shack at the edge of town. A book of thick parchment, bound with blackened thread, pages stiff with age and ash. The handwriting was spidery, frantic. The soldier was loyal once, his blood pure, his service divine. But death does not end loyalty. The Emperor demanded eternity, and eternity demands suffering. Another entry. The ore is not natural. It feeds. It remembers. When the blood of the living touches it, it awakens. A whisper, a pulse, a hunger. The guardian was made to keep it silent, to hold the curse beneath the earth. And the last, if he ever wakes again, the plague of stone will follow, for the ore is the bone of the earth, and the dead cannot bear its weight. Jared's hands trembled as he closed the book. He remembered the ghoul's groan, the long, low moan that had filled the mine when the coffin opened. It wasn't rage. It was pain, a suffering that had waited centuries for release, and he had set it free. The next days blurred together. The town fell, one by one. The children turned first, their small hands frozen mid-reach, faces captured in silent cries. Then the men who had worked the mines. Then the wives who had waited by the window for them to return. Each time Jared buried one, he could hear faint echoes beneath the soil, like the clink of distant armor. He stopped trying to sleep. One morning, when the fog rolled back over the valley, he saw the outline of the armored ghoul standing near the ridge, still, watching. Its armor was cracked and rusted now. Its helmet hung loosely over what remained of its skull, but it stood with the stillness of a sentry. It didn't move as Jared approached, didn't speak. He circled slowly, feeling the same cold radiating from the thing that had filled his cabin that night. There was a moment, small, fragile, when Jared thought he saw something human in it, the faint shimmer of memory in its hollow sockets. He took a step closer, and then the air trembled. The ground groaned beneath his boots. A fissure opened behind the creature, glowing blue with the light of buried ore. It wasn't a mine anymore. It was a wound. The earth itself was bleeding. The ghoul turned its head, slowly, and from the hollow of its throat came a voice that wasn't speech, but remembrance, a groan like the earth exhaling after centuries of pain. Jared stumbled back, his body stiffening as the gray crept higher up his arms. He fell to his knees. The air tasted of metal and dust. He realized dimly what it wanted. It wasn't to kill him. It wasn't to feed. It wanted release. The alchemist's notes echoed in his head. If he ever wakes again. And then, the final line, only when the guardian dissolves can the curse rest. Jared closed his eyes. The wind carried the scent of ash and stone. He whispered into the fog, "I'm sorry." The ground trembled once more, and the blue glow dimmed. When he opened his eyes again, the ghoul was gone. Only the fissure remained, breathing faintly like something alive beneath the dirt. He stumbled back toward town, his body growing heavier, slower, the gray reaching his throat. He knew what was coming. The price of greed wasn't just the loss of gold. It was the slow transformation of man into monument, the earth reclaiming what it had given. By the time Jared reached the edge of town, dawn had broken. He stopped beside the well, where Mrs. Harrow had once Saturday. The fog was lifting now, the sky pale and colorless. He lowered himself onto the stone rim, breathing shallowly. His skin was cracked, his fingertips numb. In the silence, he thought he heard something beneath the ground again, not the groan of stone, not the whisper of wind, but a heartbeat. It pulsed once, then again. The ore was still alive. And as Jared's body turned cold and rigid, his final thought was not of gold or redemption, but of that sound, deep in the dark, echoing like the start of something that refused to die. The sound of the curse. Waiting to begin again. By the time the sun reached its highest point, Darlow was a grave, made of statues. Jared moved through the silence, his boots scraping the stone dust that used to be people. Each breath felt heavier, slower. The gray, creeping beneath his skin, had hardened into thin plates of marble that caught the light whenever he turned. His pulse sounded distant, like something trapped beneath glass. He no longer thought of escape. The town was gone. The world beyond the valley might already have begun to rot. But deep inside him, beneath the spreading stone, there was one last flicker of movement. Not life, not hope, but duty. He could still end this. The alchemist's words haunted him. Only when the guardian dissolves can the curse rest. He'd spent 2 days searching through the ruins, trying to piece together what the alchemist had meant by dissolution. Every road led back to the same place, the mine, the source, the heart of it all. By dusk, he stood once more at the entrance to the pit. The wind moaned softly across the ridge, and the rusted rail tracks glistened faintly in the dying light. The mine mouth yawned open, wide and black like a wound that refused to heal. He could feel the presence waiting for him inside. Not hostile, just tired. As he descended, the light faded until only the faint shimmer from the cursed ore lit his way. The walls pulsed with that blue glow, veins of living stone, breathing like an animal in its sleep. He reached the chamber where he had found the coffin. The lid lay shattered. The dust that had once sealed it still shimmered in the air. The armored ghoul was kneeling there now, motionless, as though it had been waiting for him. Its armor was cracked in half, ribs of rusted metal curling away from its chest. Within, Jared could see the bones blackened and threaded with veins of blue mineral. Its skull turned toward him slowly, and the hollow eyes burned faintly with the light of the ore. It didn't move to attack. It didn't need to. Jared knelt du. I released you, he whispered. His voice sounded smaller in the vast dark. I thought I was freeing something buried, but I only freed your pain. The air stirred faintly. Dust rose, glimmering like snow. The creature's head tilted, a slow, mechanical movement. It lifted one hand, what remained of it, and pointed toward the far wall. There, half buried in stone, was a cauldron. Ancient, carved from the same marble as the coffin, its rim lined with symbols Jared recognized from the alchemist's notes. Inside was a residue that shimmered the same blue as the cursed ore. He moved closer. The moment he touched the rim, the air rippled. The walls began to hum. The ore veins along the tunnel walls brightened until the chamber was glowing like the heart of a furnace. The ghoul groaned, not in rage, but in recognition. Jared looked down at his hands. The gray had spread past his wrists now. He could feel his heartbeat slowing, his breath turning shallow. There was no more time. He tore open the leather pouch at his belt, the one he had carried since the beginning, and pulled out the small vial of greenish liquid he had stolen from the alchemist's lab before the man's house turned to dust. He hadn't known what it was back then, but now he understood. The dissolution formula. He uncorked it and poured the contents into the cauldron. The moment the liquid touched the residue, the blue light flared blindingly bright. The reaction was violent, a hiss that became a roar. The cauldron shook. The veins of ore on the walls began to melt, dripping like candle wax. The ground trembled. Jared staggered backward. The ghoul stood, its armor breaking apart, pieces falling away in molten shards. The creature's body began to collapse inward, its bones dissolving into blue smoke. Its mouth opened, and a sound escaped, not a scream, but something like a sigh of relief. The air filled with a bitter metallic scent. Jared tried to stand, but his legs had begun to harden completely. He fell to one knee, his vision blurring as the chamber around him pulsed with light. He reached toward the ghoul, or what was left of it, as it turned to face him one last time. In its hollow sockets, for the briefest instant, he saw eyes. Not empty, not monstrous human. Then the light consumed it. The cauldron split open, molten cracks running across its surface. The chamber shook violently, rocks falling from the ceiling. Jared crawled toward the fissure where the ghoul had once stood. Inside the stone, the blue glow dimmed, fading to gray. He coughed, the sound brittle, echoing. His lungs burned with dust. "It's done," he whispered, not sure if he was speaking to the creature, to himself or to the earth. The air stilled. The hum faded. The walls of the mine seemed to exhale, the tension releasing after centuries of being bound. He could feel it, the curse breaking, the mineral losing its pulse. He leaned back against the wall, exhausted. The gray reached his chest now. His breath was slowing, his heartbeat a distant echo. He knew he wouldn't leave this place alive, but there was peace in that. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like a warning. It felt like rest. He looked down at his hands now, fully stone, and remembered the faces of the townsfolk, still caught mid-motion in their final moments. Maybe now they could rest too. A faint wind moved through the tunnels, carrying away the last traces of blue dust. Jared closed his eyes. He imagined the ghoul dissolving completely, its spirit freed from the armor that had bound it. He imagined the town crumbling into quiet ruin, the valley reclaimed by moss and rain. The curse would fade into legend. The name Darlow would vanish from maps. Only whispers would remain of a place where the earth once turned men to stone. As his final breath escaped, the last vein of ore flickered once more, then went dark. The chamber fell silent. Only the drip of melting stone remained steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat slowly forgetting itself. Years passed before anyone spoke of Darlow again. The mine was sealed by mudslides and memory. The townsfolk, what remained of them, were taken away and buried in nameless graves by distant relatives who never wanted to return. The valley was left to rot, reclaimed by moss, fog, and silence. But legends do not die easily. They sleep in the soil, like embers under ash, waiting for a breath to wake them. And one autumn morning, long after the curse had faded from people's lips, a traveler stopped at what used to be the town's edge. He was a quiet man, an archivist from the state university, his car old and dusty from the road. His name was Michael Greaves, and he carried a letter from an old estate claiming ownership of a family property lost to geological disaster. He didn't believe in curses. He believed in documentation, in things that could be touched, recorded, named. But Darlow had a way of changing definitions. When he arrived, he found no sign of life. The trees grew thick, their roots curling over what used to be streets. The remains of the town hall jutted from the mud like a rib cage. There were no birds, only the sound of the wind dragging through empty windows. Michael parked his car beside a heap of rusted mining tools and stepped into the valley. The air had a stillness that felt alive, listening, somehow. He walked until he reached what the maps once marked as the main shaft. But the entrance was gone, buried beneath a landslide that had hardened over time. All that remained was a sliver of stone jutting out part of a broken sign that once read, Darlow Mining Co. End. Something glinted beneath the dirt. Michael knelt, brushing the soil aside with his gloves. There, caught in the mud, was a small bone amulet, carved roughly into the shape of an eye. A thin crack ran through its center. It was cold to the touch, colder than the ground itself. He turned it over. There was something etched on the back, faint, worn smooth by time, but he could still make out the words, "Guard what is freed." The phrase lingered in his mind as he pocketed it. That night, he camped near the old train tracks. His tent flapped softly in the breeze, the fabric straining with every gust. The forest was silent, except for the occasional shifting of leaves. He sat by the small fire, turning the amulet over in his fingers, tracing the faint grooves. It seemed to hum not audibly, but beneath the skin, like the soft tremor of a distant drum. Michael frowned. He set it down beside him. Hours passed. The fire sank low. He dreamed of stone, breathing like flesh. He saw veins of light crawling through the earth, and a figure, a man half turned to marble, kneeling beside a coffin that glowed from within. When he woke, the amulet was in his hand. He didn't remember picking it up. The air was different that morning. The mist was thicker, clinging low to the ground. His firewood was damp, as if it had rained, but the sky was dry, colorless. He decided to leave. As he walked back toward the car, he passed what used to be the miners' barracks, only fragments of wood and stone now, covered in creeping ivy. One door still hung by its hinges. Out of curiosity, he pushed it open. Inside was darkness thick, quiet. His footsteps echoed faintly. The air smelled faintly of metal and damp ash. On the far wall, someone had written something long ago, deep gouges carved into the wood. He raised his flashlight. The words were crude, but legible. Don't bury what is awake. He felt a chill move through him. The amulet in his pocket seemed to pulse. He turned off the light and stepped outside, heart pounding, though he couldn't explain why. The world around him looked the same, but quieter. Even the wind had stopped. That's when he heard it faintly, from beneath the ground, a sound like breathing. Not mechanical, not imagined. Slow, deep, coming from somewhere below the earth. Michael froze. The rational part of him scrambled for explanations. Echoes, groundwater, seismic resonance, but none of them fit. The sound was too close. He stepped back. The earth beneath his boots felt warm. He reached for the amulet, and it burned. Not fire, not heat, but something cold and sharp, searing through the fabric of his pocket. He yanked it out and dropped it. It hit the ground with a metallic clink. The moment it touched the soil, the air shifted. The ground trembled faintly, dust lifting into the still air. A voice whispered. It wasn't from any direction. It was everywhere. You shouldn't have come back. Michael spun, but there was no one there. Only the trees, the rusted rails, and the endless gray sky. He took a shaky step back. I don't know what this is, he stammered, though there was no reason to speak. I just found it. Silence. Then another whisper, closer this time. He stayed, so we could leave. Michael felt something brush against his arm, not a hand, but air that moved like breath. He looked down. The amulet was gone. Panic crawled up his throat. He backed away toward his car, but when he turned, the road wasn't there anymore. The trees were thicker now, taller. The world had rearranged itself in silence. He stumbled forward, heart hammering, until his foot struck something solid. It was stone, smooth, pale like a monument. He crouched down, brushing the dirt away. There was an inscription carved into it. Not a name, just a phrase. Jared Callan. He broke the silence. The ground beneath the stone shuddered. He didn't have time to run. The earth split open, a soft, deliberate sound, like fabric tearing. Light poured out from the crack, blue and faint, the same hue that had pulsed through the cursed ore. Michael fell backward, his vision blurred. The light was blinding now, pulsing with rhythm like a heart restarting after years of stillness. And then, from within the fissure, a shape began to rise. Not a corpse, not a ghoul, something else. It shimmered like smoke and bone, human and inhuman all at once. In its chest, embedded deep, was the bone amulet, glowing with cold light. Michael couldn't move. He could only stare as the figure took form, the faint outline of a man in tattered mining clothes, his face half stone, half light. The figure looked at him, not with malice, but with recognition. You found it, it whispered, the voice echoing through the valley, carried by wind that hadn't moved in years. Then you must carry it. Michael shook his head. I don't understand. The figure stepped closer. Its touch was neither cold nor warm, just heavy, like the weight of centuries pressing down. You woke what I dissolved, it murmured, and now it must sleep again. The amulet pulsed once, bright enough to blind him. When he opened his eyes, he was standing alone. The fissure was gone. The valley was silent again. He looked down. The amulet hung around his neck. He didn't remember putting it there. He left Darlow that evening, never speaking of what he'd seen. But sometimes, when he walked through quiet places, libraries, museums, towns at night, he felt a vibration beneath his feet, like the heartbeat of stone, deep and waiting. And when he looked into mirrors, sometimes, just sometimes, he saw a figure standing behind him, half shadow, half light, its mouth moving soundlessly. He never took the amulet off. He told himself it was superstition, that it was just a charm, a relic from a forgotten time. But those who met him later said his voice changed over the years. It grew slower, heavier, as if his words carried dust. When he died, decades later, in his sleep they found the amulet still around his neck. But it wasn't bone anymore. It had turned to stone, and beneath it, carved faintly into his chest, were the same words etched on Jared's tomb. He broke the silence. The azure swarm. Noah met Lyra on a late September evening when the sky was still bruised with summer's fading warmth. The university courtyard was half empty, the air carrying that faint metallic chill that signals the start of autumn. He was sitting beneath the bronze statue of an unnamed scholar, sketching lines of chemical equations into a notebook stained with coffee, when she appeared a flash of pale hair, a glass jar in her hands, and a look in her eyes that made the world feel suddenly less explainable. Inside the jar was a single butterfly. Its wings were unlike anything Noah had ever seen, not blue, not violet, but some impossible color in between. It shimmered faintly under the streetlight, as if alive with its own light source. Lyra didn't notice him at first. She crouched by the base of the statue, holding the jar close to her face, whispering something under her breath. When she finally looked up, her gaze caught his. "You're watching," she said without accusation. "I study things that shouldn't exist," Noah replied. "Guess that includes you." And she smiled, but not in the way people usually do. It was small, private, as if she were smiling for herself. Then she lifted the jar toward him. "Its name is Morphocaroleus. They said it was extinct. They were wrong." He leaned closer. The butterfly didn't move, but its wings trembled slightly, like breath caught in glass. From that moment, Noah was hooked not on the butterfly, but on her. There was something about Lyra's conviction, her certainty that the world was deeper, stranger, than the professors or textbooks allowed. He was a scientist. She was a believer. Somehow, that contrast drew them together like magnets. In the weeks that followed, they became inseparable. They met after classes, walking along the forested paths behind the biology department. Lyra carried her notebook filled with sketches of insects, their wings pinned in perfect symmetry, annotated with small, looping handwriting that looked more like spells than science. Noah carried his tablet and digital microscope, trying to quantify what she described as feeling. "Science dissects," she told him once. "But belief lets things stay whole." He laughed. "Belief also burns witches. Only the wrong kind of belief," she said softly, eyes glinting. "The kind that's afraid of its own truth." That night, she took him to a place she called the Hollow Vale, an abandoned archaeological site a few miles from campus. The ground there was uneven, overgrown, scarred by old trenches and concrete slabs. Lyra said the place used to be a meteor impact site, though the university denied it. "There's still something alive down there," she whispered, her voice trembling not with fear but with awe. "I can feel it." Yeah. Noah thought it was just the wind howling through broken scaffolds. He followed anyway. They reached a shallow crater filled with thin mist. Lyra knelt, brushing aside fallen leaves to reveal something buried a cocoon, translucent, the size of a human heart. "It's still breathing," she said. He didn't want to believe her, but he saw it too. A faint pulse, slow and rhythmic, like a heartbeat in amber. Noah felt a tightening in his chest, that mixture of fascination and dread that comes from standing too close to a mystery. He wanted to take it, to analyze it under the microscope, but Lyra stopped him. "It's not ready," she said, "and neither are you." He didn't understand what she meant until the following week. Lyra began to change. She stopped attending lectures, spent her nights wandering the woods. When Noah found her one evening behind the old greenhouse, her hands were covered in blue dust like pollen, shimmering faintly under the moonlight. "It's happening," she murmured, her eyes glazed. "They're waking up." He tried to reason with her, to pull her back to the rational world. But her obsession deepened. She filled their shared dorm with butterfly specimens, hundreds of them pinned to corkboards and taped to mirrors. Some were real, some painted in intricate detail. The air smelled of formaldehyde and honey. When Noah asked where she found the new ones, the blue-winged kind that no record had ever mentioned, she only said, "They come to me." He thought it was delusion, a form of grief or mania. But when he woke one night to find their window wide open and the room filled with fluttering phosphorescent wings, he realized this wasn't metaphor anymore. The butterflies didn't move like living things. They drifted in slow spirals, hovering just above Lyra's sleeping body, as if drawing warmth from her. And she was smiling in her sleep, whispering in a language he didn't recognize. He reached out. One of the creatures landed on his wrist. Its touch was cold, almost electric. He could see through the paper-thin wings, veins pulsing faintly with blue light. Then it sank its proboscis into his skin. The pain was sharp and fleeting, followed by a wave of warmth that spread through his arm. He slapped it away, crushing it against the floor. But where it died, a smear of light remained, like wet paint that refused to dry. When Lyra woke, she looked at him not with guilt, not even surprise, just sadness. "They don't like to be hurt," she whispered. "They remember pain." He wanted to shout at her, to demand an explanation, but something in her expression silenced him. It wasn't madness he saw in her eyes. It was devotion. Over the next few days, the campus changed. Students began to fall ill. A few disappeared entirely. Rumors spread of blue butterflies seen near the old chapel, of strange patterns burned into window panes. Noah heard whispers in the cafeteria. "It's her, the bug girl. She did something. She's cursed." He wanted to defend her, but a part of him wasn't sure anymore. When he finally confronted Lyra, she was standing by the greenhouse again, surrounded by dozens of the azure creatures. They perched on her shoulders, her hair, her outstretched arms as if she were their queen. "They're not monsters," she said, her voice trembling with conviction. "They're guardians. They protect love. They protect me." He took a step forward. "Lyra, they're killing people." "No," she said softly. "They're punishing cruelty." The last thing Noah remembered from that night was the reflection of her eyes glowing faintly with the same impossible blue. And for the first time since he'd met her, Noah realized that Lyra didn't need to be saved. She needed to be believed. Noah couldn't sleep after that night. Even when he closed his eyes, he could feel the faint pulse of the butterfly's sting beneath his skin, as if something small and luminous had taken root inside his veins. He told himself it was psychosomatic, that his mind was inventing sensations to match his guilt. But every so often, when he sat too long in silence, he heard a soft, rhythmic fluttering from somewhere deep within him. Campus life continued, at least on the surface. The faculty sent out announcements blaming the recent disappearances on a series of unfortunate accidents. Students whispered about curfews and shadows. The biology building was closed for fumigation. But in the quiet spaces, the stairwells, the back gardens, the library's dim corners, Noah could feel something shifting, a heaviness in the air, a tension beneath every whispered conversation. Lyra was nowhere to be found. He searched the places she loved most: the observatory roof, the pond where the reeds grew wild, the greenhouse now sealed behind metal shutters. He even returned to the hollow vale, half hoping she'd be there among the ruins, kneeling before that strange cocoon. But there was only mist and silence, and yet, every time he thought about her, a faint trail of blue light seemed to flicker in the edge of his vision. Sometimes it lingered, drifting like smoke, vanishing when he blinked. It wasn't until the fourth night of searching that he realized the truth. She was still with him, not physically, but through something else, a bond, invisible and alive. When he dreamed, he saw through her eyes. He saw a room lit by candlelight filled with pinned wings, glimmering like shards of stained glass. He saw her hand reach toward a mirror, her reflection fracturing into dozens of overlapping faces, all hers, all slightly wrong. He heard her whisper, "They're not dead, Noah, just waiting." And then he'd wake, his heart pounding, the taste of iron in his mouth. The next morning, he noticed the veins on his wrist, glowing faintly under the sunlight. Not bright, but enough to make him recoil. The pattern wasn't random, it resembled the delicate lines on a butterfly's wing. He wore long sleeves after that. By the end of the week, 2 more students had been found. Their bodies were desiccated, brittle as paper. The coroner's report described complete fluid extraction, though no puncture wounds were visible. Noah tried to read the article twice, but couldn't get past the word extraction. It felt too clinical for what it truly was. Feeding. He avoided the news after that. Then, one evening, a folded note appeared beneath his door. No name, no signature, just a short message in handwriting he'd recognize anywhere. Meet me where they sleep. The handwriting trembled slightly, as if written in haste or fear. He knew what it meant. The greenhouse. Noah waited until midnight before leaving. The campus was silent, the lamplight dimmed by a rising fog. When he reached the greenhouse, the padlock had already been broken. Inside, the air smelled of rot and nectar. She was there. Lyra stood by the center table, surrounded by hundreds of azure butterflies. They didn't fly. They hovered suspended in the air like a slow-moving storm. Her face was pale, her hair tangled, but her eyes still held that strange, unshakable calm. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I shouldn't have," Noah replied. "You have to stop this. I didn't start it." Her voice cracked. "They did. I only answered." He stepped closer. "Answered what?" She looked down at her hands. They were trembling. In her palm was a small cocoon, translucent, glowing faintly from within. "The call," she whispered. "They chose me." The word sent a chill through him. "Lyra, these things, they're killing people." Her eyes flicked up to his. "Do you think I don't know that? Every time one of them dies, I feel it. Every scream, every heartbeat fading away. I feel it here." She pressed her hand to her chest. "They're not monsters, Noah. They're echoes. They were made from pain." He wanted to believe she was delusional. He wanted to anchor himself to logic. But the light from the cocoon reflected in her eyes, and something about that glow felt heartbreakingly real. "Why you?" he asked softly. "Because I loved too much," she said simply. "Because I couldn't let go." The air around them thickened, the butterflies shifting, as if listening. Their wings pulsed faintly with each of her breaths. "You can't save them," Noah said. "And if you don't stop, they'll destroy everything." She smiled sadly. "You still don't understand. I'm not trying to save them." He froze. "I'm becoming them." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the slow, synchronized fluttering of 1,000 delicate heartbeats woven together. Noah reached for her hand. "Then let me help you." Lyra shook her head. "You already are." He didn't know what she meant until she looked at his wrist. The veins beneath his skin were now glowing brighter, pulsing in rhythm with the swarm. "They marked you," she said softly. "You're part of the thread now. Between us. Between them." He stumbled back. "No, I didn't ask for this. They never ask either." He turned to leave, but the air rippled the sound of wings filling the space like a chorus. The butterflies surrounded him, brushing against his skin, whispering against his ears. He could hear them, not words exactly, but emotions. Hunger, longing, devotion. Lyra's voice rose above the hum. "You can't sever it, Noah. The more you resist, the tighter it binds. Then I'll cut it." Her eyes glistened. "You'll cut yourself." He ran. Outside, the fog had thickened into a pale wall, and behind him the greenhouse pulsed faintly with blue light like a heartbeat buried beneath glass. Back in his dorm, he tried to scrub the light from his skin, washing his hands until they bled. But the glow wouldn't fade. It shimmered faintly in the dark, the same hue as her eyes. He didn't dream that night. Instead, he heard a voice faint, distant, yet close enough to make him sit upright in bed. "Do you still believe in me?" Her whisper. Inside his head, he wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. He pressed his palm to his chest and felt it. A slow, foreign rhythm. beating beneath his heart. That was when he realized the truth. The thread between them wasn't just emotional, it was biological. Whatever lived inside Lyra was now alive in him. And somewhere, in the dark corners of the campus, the azure swarm waited silent, patient, and breathing in time with his pulse. Noah hadn't been back to the observatory since the night he and Lyra had first met there, months before the world began unraveling. It used to be their place, the quiet dome where the sky opened like an old wound full of light and promise. Now, it was something else entirely. The climb up the hill was longer than he remembered. The trees that lined the path had lost their leaves early this year, their bare branches trembling in a wind that carried whispers of ash. Each breath felt heavier, as if the air itself resisted being taken. By the time Noah reached the top, dusk had fallen. The dome loomed against the fading light, its metal ribs catching the last orange gleam before night claimed them. The front door was ajar. A faint, bluish glow leaked through the crack, too pale, too rhythmic to be electric light. He hesitated only a moment before pushing it open. Inside, the observatory had transformed. The telescope still stood in the center, but the walls were alive, crawling with slow-moving butterflies, each the same deep azure as the swarm he had seen in the greenhouse. Their wings pulsed faintly, breathing in unison, creating a shimmer that rippled through the shadows. And at the base of the telescope stood Lyra. She looked almost translucent beneath the blue glow. Her skin shimmered faintly, as though thin membranes of light were forming beneath her flesh. The air around her hummed with energy, a sound so low and steady it seemed to vibrate through the bones. Noah stepped forward cautiously. Lyra. Her eyes lifted toward him, the same soft gray he remembered, but now threaded with veins of glowing blue. You came. You called, he said quietly. Her smile was faint, almost apologetic. You could have ignored it. I tried. He moved closer, and as he did, he saw that the floor around her was marked with concentric circles, drawn not in chalk or paint, but in a fine dusting of butterfly wings. They formed symbols he couldn't recognize, ancient, symmetrical, almost geometric. What are you doing? He asked. Her gaze drifted upward toward the ceiling. Finishing it. Finishing what? The transformation. She said it so gently, as though describing something inevitable. Noah shook his head. This isn't you, Lyra. You're letting them control you. Her expression softened. You still think I'm separate from them? He took a step closer, his voice trembling. You're human. You always were. I was, she said. Before I found the pit. Before they found me. She turned slightly, revealing the glass case behind her. Inside it was a meteorite, small, charred, and cracked through its center. Blue light seeped from the fissures, swirling like liquid smoke. This is where they came from, she said. The beginning. The seed. He could feel the heat from it, even from a distance. Though it wasn't the warmth of fire, it was a living warmth, like the breath of something buried deep in the earth. They were sleeping, she continued, her voice almost reverent, waiting for someone who could hear them, someone who could carry them. Noah's throat tightened. And that someone was you, she nodded. They needed emotion to survive, passion, devotion, love. I gave them everything. Love isn't meant to consume, he said. Her eyes glimmered. And yet it does. The butterflies shifted on the walls, their wings fluttering in soft waves. The sound was hypnotic, like the ocean breathing. Noah could feel the rhythm syncing with his heartbeat again, faster this time, hungrier. He took a deep breath. If you keep doing this, you'll lose yourself. Lyra stepped toward him. For the first time, he saw the faint pattern etched across her skin, delicate lines, like veins or roots branching outward from her collarbone. They glowed faintly beneath the fabric of her shirt. Maybe that's the point, she whispered. Maybe there's nothing left of me worth saving. Noah's voice cracked. That's not true. She looked at him then, really looked as if searching his face for something she'd misplaced. You always wanted to save people, didn't you? even when they didn't ask to be saved. He swallowed hard. I'm not here to save you. I'm here to stop you. The words seemed to hang between them, sharp and final. For a heartbeat, the room went completely silent. Then the light around the meteorite flared, and the butterflies began to stir. Lyra's voice softened again, almost pleading. Please don't make me fight you, Noah. You don't understand. If I finish this, they'll be free. They won't need to feed anymore. They'll kill you. They'll become me. The air crackled, and for a moment, Noah saw the faint outline of wings unfolding behind her, vast and translucent, stretching from her shoulders like living light. They quivered once, scattering motes of blue dust across the room. He stepped forward, his voice breaking. Lyra, listen to me. They're lying to you. They don't lie, she whispered. They don't even speak. They feel. They remember. They only want what I want. And what's that? To never be alone again. She raised her hands, and the swarm lifted from the walls, spiraling upward in a silent storm. The observatory filled with a dazzling chaos of light and motion, wings brushing against glass, skin, metal. Noah shielded his face, shouting her name, but her voice was lost, and the sound of 1,000 tiny hearts beating at once. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The swarm froze in midair, hovering in stillness. Every wing glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with her breathing. Lyra turned toward him, tears streaking down her face. You could still join me, she whispered. You already carry the mark. You're already one of us. Noah reached for her, but something deep within him recoiled, a warning, primal and certain. If you finish this, there'll be nothing left of either of us. Then maybe that's mercy. Before he could answer, she touched the meteorite. The light erupted. It wasn't an explosion, not in the physical sense. It was expansion. The light filled every corner, every cell, every thought. Noah felt his body pulled forward, dissolved, scattered across a sea of blue. For a heartbeat, he wasn't sure where he ended, and the swarm began. He could hear them, billions of tiny voices humming in harmony, each carrying a memory of her, of him, of everyone they'd touched. Then darkness crashed back. Noah was on the floor, gasping, the room spinning. The meteorite had dimmed. The swarm hovered uncertainly above, their glow fading. And Lyra was on her knees, trembling. The blue light had left her eyes. She looked at him, and for the first time in weeks, she looked human again. I can't stop them, she whispered. They're too many. Noah crawled to her, gripping her shoulders. Then help me find a way to end it. She shook her head weakly. It's not about ending it anymore. It's about choosing who we become. And her body was shaking, her skin feverish and pale. Noah, if you destroy the source, you destroy me too. He froze. The meteorite pulsed faintly behind her, a dying heart. Lyra's voice was soft now, fading. Please, if you have to choose, let it be peace. He held her hand, his throat tight. I can't lose you. You already did, she murmured, eyes closing. I'm just what's left of the love that couldn't die. And the light in the room flickered, the swarm drawing closer again, restless, confused. Noah looked from her to the meteorite, to the pulsing shadows that filled the dome. He knew what he had to do. He just didn't know if he could survive it. The wind outside rose suddenly, pressing against the dome like a living thing. The butterflies stirred again, and Lyra's faint whisper bled through the hum. It's all right, Noah. It's almost over. But he knew it wasn't. Not yet. It was only the beginning of the end. The air around the observatory was thick, trembling with the pulse of thousands of unseen wings. When Elias stumbled back through the shattered door, the light was different, cold, bluish, like something from beneath the ocean, instead of the sky. Every surface shimmered faintly with dust that moved as if it were alive. Lyra stood at the center of it all. Her arms were raised toward the broken dome, her hair lifting slightly as though underwater. The butterflies, those impossible blue creatures, spiraled around her in perfect unison, moving as if following her breath. Her skin glowed faintly where they landed, veins illuminated by that same azure hue. Elia's voice cracked. "Lyra, please, you have to stop." She turned, and for a heartbeat, she looked almost human again. Her eyes softened, mouth parting slightly in recognition. But then the swarm tightened its orbit, and the light inside her flickered something ancient, something hungry. "I can't," she said, her voice trembling, split between reverence and despair. "They're part of me now. They answer to what I feel. You don't understand, Elias, they listen." He took a step closer, hands shaking. "Then make them listen to reason. You're hurting people. You're killing them." Lyra laughed, quietly. "I didn't kill them. They were judged. They wanted to take you from me. They wanted to humiliate what I love." Her tone broke something inside him. The girl he once knew, the one who collected moths under dim porch lights, whispering about their patterns, was gone. What stood before him now was something else entirely, a vessel filled with devotion so deep it had turned poisonous. The air rippled. The swarm shifted direction, encircling Elias now. The sound of their wings was like whispering rain, but sharper, carrying threads of voices that weren't human. Faces fleeting, distorted, seemed to appear in the blur. He covered his mouth, his mind burning from the pressure. "You're not doing this," he managed. "They are. They're feeding on you." Lyra's smile faltered. A flash of pain crossed her face. "Feeding?" Elias took a risk one step forward. That crater, the one you found them in it, wasn't some sacred place. It was a wound. You didn't find power there. You woke it up. Her lips parted as though to respond, but then the butterflies around her flared with light, their wings fanning faster, angrier. The glow turned sharp, pulsating with heat. "They don't like lies," she whispered. "No," Elias said, his voice shaking. "They don't like competition." The swarm descended. He barely had time to shield his face before they struck thousands of tiny bodies battering against him, cutting his skin with invisible edges. He stumbled, blood streaking his cheek. The world spun blue. He hit the floor, breath knocked out of him, and through the blur he saw Lyra clutch her head, screaming. The butterflies were turning on her. They no longer moved with her heartbeat, they were devouring it. Their glow deepened, becoming almost liquid, pouring down her arms like molten light. Her scream fractured into silence. Elias crawled toward the overturned workstation, toward the half-empty container of accelerant they'd used for cleaning samples. His vision flickered. He could barely feel his fingers, but he knew what he had to do. The crater, that was where this began. That was where it had to end. He staggered out of the observatory, through the shattered hallways of the research dome, following the sound, the strange low hum that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The butterflies trailed him like smoke, some burning faintly, others were forming out of dust. When he reached the crater, it was like staring into the eye of something sleeping and dreaming of hunger. The soil shimmered with blue fireflies. The air bent around it, as though the ground itself was inhaling. Lyra appeared behind him, barefoot, blood on her hands. She looked pale, ghostly, but still beautiful. "Elias," she said softly, "don't. Please. If you destroy it, I'll disappear too. We're connected. You said you loved me." "I did," he whispered. "And that's why I can't let this continue." Her tears glimmered blue as they fell, evaporating before touching the ground. The butterflies swarmed between them, uncertain now, as if torn between two masters. He opened the container and splashed the remaining accelerant over the rim of the crater. The smell of chemicals filled the air. His hand shook as he struck the lighter. Lyra reached out. "Elias." The flame caught instantly, racing across the soil with terrifying speed. The crater ignited in a ring of blue-white fire, and the swarm screamed a chorus of metallic, shrill agony. Lyra fell to her knees, clutching her chest. The light within her flickered violently. "Stop!" she cried. "You're killing me." He looked at her, tears streaming down his soot-streaked face. "I'm sorry." Then, the crater erupted. A burst of light swallowed everything. The force knocked him backward, his ears ringing, vision blank. For a few seconds, maybe longer, there was nothing but silence. When the sound returned, it was like waking up underwater. The world was dim again. The air smelled of ash and ozone. The crater was gone, just a shallow hollow in the earth. No glow, no hum, only smoke. Elias crawled toward where Lyra had fallen. There was no body, only a faint scattering of blue dust drifting in the wind. He reached out, letting it collect in his palm. It pulsed faintly, then faded to gray. He sat there for a long time, unable to move, staring into the emptiness. Somewhere in the distance, a single butterfly wing fluttered weakly on the ground, burnt, half transparent, still trembling as though remembering the air. He closed his hand around it, and for a brief moment, he thought he heard her voice, soft, distant, carried by the dying wind. We're still connected. Then it was gone. The night fell silent again, the kind of silence that no longer felt like peace. Only aftermath, only what remains when devotion burns itself away. When the smoke cleared, Elias sat alone beside the crater, his clothes scorched, his breath trembling in short, shallow bursts. The wind had shifted, no longer carrying that faint metallic hum of the swarm, no longer vibrating with invisible wings. The night was still again, too still. He stared into the hollowed pit, where the blue fire had burned away everything. The soil was glassy and black now, rippled like cooled magma. No trace of Lyra, no shimmer of wings, no echo of what had once lived there except for a faint line of powder blue ash scattered like veins through the dark earth. He pressed his hand against the soil. It was still warm. He could almost imagine a heartbeat pulsing beneath it. In the weeks that followed, the campus fell silent about what happened. The university called it a chemical incident. The observatory was sealed off. Researchers were told to destroy the recordings, the field notes, the insect samples. Officially, Lyra never existed, but Elias couldn't forget. He stayed in his dorm for days, barely eating, barely sleeping. His hands still bore tiny scars from where the butterflies had cut him, fine silver lines that glowed faintly when the lights went out. He kept seeing her everywhere. Reflections in glass, the shape of her shoulders in a passing shadow. Sometimes, when he tried to sleep, he'd wake to the soft sound of fluttering, like paper being turned somewhere in the dark. He started collecting ashes from the crater quietly, in secret. It became a ritual. Every night he'd go back to the edge, scoop a handful of blue-gray dust into a small tin box, and whisper her name, not to summon her, just so he wouldn't forget the sound. People said he was unwell, that grief had unmoored him, that he'd been too close to the incident. But Elias knew better. He could feel her. Not alive, exactly, but not gone either. The connection hadn't burned away. It had only changed form. One evening, as the last light of dusk sank below the hills, he opened the tin box again. The ashes inside shimmered faintly in the fading light, just for a second. He thought it was a trick of the sun, but then the shimmer deepened, a faint blue glow pulsing from within the dust, like breath. He leaned closer. Lyra? The air trembled slightly. The ashes lifted, weightless, spinning in a slow circle above his hand. He felt warmth against his skin, a gentle, familiar warmth, the same he used to feel when her fingers brushed his. His throat tightened. What do you want from me? There was no voice, no words, just a feeling, something soft and heavy pressing against his chest, a mix of longing and regret wrapped around the faintest trace of devotion. He whispered, "You shouldn't be here." The ashes trembled again, as though disagreeing. They hovered for another moment, then slowly drifted back into the box, the glow fading into stillness. He closed the lid gently. After that night, he never returned to the crater again. But the box stayed with him through every move, every apartment, every attempt to start over. Sometimes he'd wake up in the middle of the night, open it, and find that faint shimmer still there, pulsing slowly, as if breathing. He stopped questioning it, He stopped trying to separate science from what he'd seen. Some things weren't meant to be categorized. Some things only lived in the space between faith and fear. Years passed. Elias grew older, getter. He took a position teaching entomology. Ironic, he thought, how he now lectured about patterns of migration and swarm intelligence. His students knew him as kind, brilliant, maybe a little distant. None of them knew about the small tin box he kept in his office drawer, wrapped in black silk. Sometimes, when a student brought in a specimen, usually a moth or a bright-winged beetle, he'd freeze for just a moment, staring at it under the microscope. And if the scales on its wings shimmered faintly blue, he'd have to look away. It wasn't until the spring of his retirement that something changed. A package arrived on his desk. No return address. Inside was a small glass jar. Within it, pressed neatly between cotton layers, was a butterfly, deep azure, with veins of silver tracing its wings. Perfect, still, and underneath, a note. Just one line, written in handwriting he knew as well as his own. You said we'd always be connected. Nay, the world tilted. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. He unscrewed the lid, hands trembling, and the scent of dust filled the air, sweet, faintly metallic, just as it had that night. The butterfly's wings moved once, twice, though no wind touched them. Then it rose, silent and slow, circling his head once before landing gently on his open palm. Its wings pulsed faintly blue. Elias smiled through tears. You came back. The butterfly fluttered once more, then dissolved into ash, vanishing between his fingers. He sat there for a long time, staring at his empty hand. When he finally rose and walked to the window, the sun was setting. Across the horizon, a faint shimmer moved through the sky, dozens, maybe hundreds of small blue sparks, swirling together before fading into the clouds. He didn't know if it was real. He didn't care. Because somewhere, beneath the hum of the world, he could feel it again, the faint, rhythmic flutter of wings, steady and soft, keeping time with his heartbeat. And for the first time in years, Elias whispered her name without fear. Lyra. Outside, in the dying light, something answered back, just a breath of sound, a single echo that might have been wind, or might have been her. Then silence returned, and in that silence, there was peace. Every curse begins with love. Every haunting starts with a promise someone refused to break. If these stories found you tonight, remember there's always a price for listening too closely. Until next time, sleep with one ear open